The giant mountain man slammed his fist on the counter hard enough to crack the wood. "I need a wife. Today!" His voice was desperate, raw. Every customer in the general store froze. Boone Mercer, the savage recluse parents warned their children about, was begging. "Tomorrow morning, a train brings my daughter. A daughter I never knew existed. If I don't have a family waiting," his steel gray eyes found Elira's, "they'll take her away forever." Before you discover why a lonely storekeeper agreed to marry the most dangerous man in the territory, drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and let's begin. The autumn wind carried the smell of coming snow through Redemption Ridge that afternoon, cutting through the dusty main street like a warning. Elira Voss was restocking shelves in her general store when the door exploded inward with enough force to rattle every jar of preserves on the wall. She didn't scream. She'd stopped screaming years ago. But when she turned and saw Boone Mercer filling the doorway like some ancient nightmare made flesh, even her carefully constructed calm wavered. The man was massive. Not just tall, though he stood well over 6 feet, but built like he'd been carved from the same granite that formed the mountains behind town. His beard was wild and dark, shot through with premature gray. His clothes looked like they'd been through a war, buckskin worn thin at the elbows, boots caked with mud, and worse things. A coat that might have been brown once but was now the color of dried blood and mountain storms. But it was his eyes that made people cross the street when they saw him coming. Steel gray and haunted, carrying the kind of weight that came from seeing things no man should see and doing things no man should do. Those eyes found Elira, and for a moment she saw something she'd never expected to see in Boone Mercer's face. Terror. "I need to talk to you," he said. His voice was rough, like he didn't use it much. "Private." The store had gone silent. Mrs. Henderson clutched her basket of thread. Young Tommy Bradford stood frozen by the pickle barrel, mouth hanging open. Everyone in Redemption Ridge knew the stories about Boone Mercer, how he'd survived a mine collapse that killed 17 men, how he disappeared into the mountains afterward and only came down twice a year for supplies, how trappers sometimes heard him talking to ghosts in the high passes, how Marshal Davies had once tried to check on him during a harsh winter, and Boone had met him on the trail with a rifle, telling him in no uncertain terms that the next man who came looking wouldn't make it back down. Elira met his gaze without flinching. She'd built a life on not flinching. "Whatever you need to say, you can say it here, Mr. Mercer." Something flickered across his face. Frustration, maybe, or shame. "Please." The word sounded like it cost him everything. It's about a child." That changed things. Elira set down the can of peaches she'd been holding. "Mrs. Henderson, would you mind watching the counter for a few minutes?" The older woman's eyes went wide. "Elira, you can't be serious. You don't know what he—" "5 minutes," Elira said quietly. She'd learned long ago that the firmest words were the quiet ones. She led Boone to the back room, acutely aware of how small the space felt with him in it. He had to duck under the door frame. His shoulders nearly touched both walls. Up close, she could see the exhaustion carved into his face. The man looked like he hadn't slept in days. "I'm listening," she said. Boone removed his hat. His hands shook. "I got a telegram 2 weeks ago," he said, "from a lawyer in Denver. A woman named Catherine Walsh died of fever. Before she passed, she told them I had a daughter." Elira felt something cold settle in her stomach. "A daughter, 7 years old, name's Ivy." His voice cracked on the name. "Catherine and we were together before the mine collapse. I was different then, had plans, thought I'd make something of myself." He looked down at his scarred hands. "After the collapse, I wasn't the same. Couldn't sleep without seeing the dark pressing in. Couldn't stop hearing the men screaming. I told Catherine I needed time, told her I'd write." "But you didn't." "No." The admission came out like a confession. "She wrote me. Letters came to the assay office in town for months. I never picked them up, never wanted her to see what I'd become. Thought I was doing her a favor, letting her move on." His jaw clenched. "She was pregnant. Tried to tell me in those letters. Raised our daughter alone. Worked herself half to death doing it." Elira had seen enough tragedy in her 32 years to recognize it in someone else. This wasn't a man looking for sympathy. This was a man drowning in guilt and desperately searching for air. The telegram said Ivy's arriving tomorrow morning on the 10:15 train from Denver, Boone continued. But there's a problem. The lawyer contacted Judge Morrison here in town, told him about the situation. Morrison said, he stopped, swallowed hard. He said a child can't live with an unmarried trapper who disappears into the mountains for months at a time. Says it's not proper, not safe. If I can't provide proof of a stable family home when that train arrives, they're sending her to an orphanage in Sacramento. I'll never see her again. But it warms to certainty. The pieces started falling into place. That's why you're here, Elira said slowly. You need someone to pretend to be your wife. Not pretend. Boone pulled a folded paper from his coat. Real marriage. Legal. Judge Morrison already knows about it. I went to him this morning, told him I was engaged. He said if I'm married before that train arrives, he'll approve the placement. Elira stared at him. You told the judge you were engaged. To whom? I didn't have a name yet. He met her eyes. I'm asking you. The audacity of it stole her breath. Mr. Mercer, you can't possibly... I know what I'm asking. He cut her off, but there was no anger in it, only desperation. I know we're strangers. I know my reputation. I know I got no right to ask any woman for this kind of help. Then why me? Because you're alone too. The words hit harder than they should have. I see you in town sometimes, Boone said quietly. You work this store 7 days a week, never close early, never take a day off. You're always pleasant to customers, but you never let anyone too close. You live in that room above the store by yourself. No family visits, no gentlemen callers. You've built a life where you don't need anyone. That's my choice. I know. He nodded. That's why I'm asking. Because you understand what it means to want to be left alone. I'm not offering romance or companionship or any of that. I'm offering a business arrangement. Elira's mind raced. What kind of arrangement? You marry me tomorrow morning before the train arrives. We present ourselves to Judge Morrison as a proper married couple with a home ready for a child. You help me keep custody of my daughter for 1 year. That's what the judge said he'd require to ensure stability. After that, the marriage ends. You get an annulment, go back to your life. I take full responsibility for Ivy up in the mountains. And what do I get out of this? Boone reached into his coat again and pulled out a small leather pouch. He set it on the table between them. The weight of it made a solid thunk. $1,400, every cent I've saved in 7 years. It's yours, regardless of whether the arrangement works or not. I'll also sign over the deed to this building. Elira blinked. This building? I own it. Bought it 5 years ago when the previous owner died and his widow needed quick cash. I've been renting it back to you through a land agent, so you wouldn't know. He saw her expression and added quickly, I wasn't trying to deceive you. I knew if you realized I owned it, you might feel beholden, might not speak your mind when the rent came due. I wanted you to feel secure here. She didn't know what to do with that information. So you're offering me $1,400 and this building in exchange for 1 year as your wife. In name only, he clarified. I got a cabin up in the mountains, 3 rooms. You and Ivy can have the bedroom. I'll sleep in the main room by the fire. I won't touch you, won't expect anything except that you help me create a home stable enough that they don't take my daughter away. Elira wanted to say no. Every rational part of her brain screamed that this was insane, but there was something in his eyes that stopped her. She'd seen that look before. In her own mirror, years ago, when she'd first arrived in Redemption Ridge running from ghosts she couldn't outpace. The look of someone who'd lost everything and was making one last desperate gamble to save something that mattered. Why didn't you ask someone else? She asked. Widow Patterson might have agreed, Sarah Chen at the boarding house. Because they'd want something real eventually, Boone said. They'd want affection or companionship, or they'd convince themselves love could grow. You won't. You understand walls, Miss Voss. You've built them high as mine. He wasn't wrong. I need an answer, Boone pressed. That train arrives in 18 hours. Elira closed her eyes. Thought about the little girl on that train. 7 years old. Mother dead. Father a stranger. Being shipped off to an orphanage full of other unwanted children. She thought about another little girl. Different time, different place. A student who'd needed help that Elira had been too afraid to provide. Clara. When she opened her eyes, Boone was watching her with the intensity of a man watching his last hope slip away. "What's the little girl's name again?" she asked quietly. "Ivy. Ivy Catherine Mercer. Does she know about you, that you exist?" Catherine told her everything before she died. Told her I was her father. Told her, his voice roughed, told her I was a good man once, that I'd made mistakes, but I'd loved Catherine truly. "Did you?" "Yes." No hesitation. "I did. I do. That's what makes it worse. I loved her enough that I should have been brave enough to stay. Instead, I was a coward who convinced himself he was being noble." Elira respected honesty, even when it was ugly, especially when it was ugly. "This marriage," she said slowly, "it would have to look real. Judge Morrison isn't a fool. Neither are the people in this town. If we can't convince them, this won't work." "I know. That means living together, presenting ourselves as a family, attending church socials if required, acting like a married couple," Boone finished. "I understand. I'll do whatever's necessary. So will you, or you wouldn't still be considering this." He was reading her too well. "I need to think," Elira said. "I don't have time for 5 minutes, Mr. Mercer. Give me 5 minutes alone." He looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her face stopped him. He nodded once and stepped out, pulling the door closed behind him. Elira sat in the sudden silence, hands pressed flat on the table. $1,400. The deed to this building. Financial security she'd never have otherwise. But that wasn't why she was considering it. She looked at the far wall where a small photograph hung in a tarnished frame. A schoolhouse back east. Children lined up in front. One little girl in the second row with dark braids and a gap-toothed smile. Clara, the girl who'd run away into a blizzard because home wasn't safe, and the teacher who noticed hadn't been brave enough to act. The girl who'd frozen to death 3 miles from town, trying to reach the schoolhouse where she thought someone might protect her. Elira had left teaching after that. Left Pennsylvania. Left everything. Came west to disappear into a place where no one knew her failures. She'd been running for 6 years. Maybe it was time to stop. She stood and opened the door. Boone turned immediately, reading her face. "I have conditions," Elira said. Relief crashed across his features. "Anything. First, the girl, Ivy. She comes first. In everything. This isn't about us. It's about giving her a safe home and a chance at a real life." "Agreed. Second, if at any point I believe you're a danger to her, the arrangement ends immediately. I don't care what Judge Morrison says. I don't care about the money. You understand?" His eyes hardened, but not with anger, with resolve. "If I'm ever a danger to my daughter, I'll leave myself. You won't have to ask. Third, after the year ends and the marriage is annulled, I want regular updates about how she's doing. Not detailed letters, just proof of life, proof she's safe and cared for." Something shifted in his expression. Understanding, maybe. "You've lost a child before," he said quietly. Elira's throat tightened. "I failed a child before. I won't do it again." Boone nodded slowly. "You'll get your updates. Every month if you want them. Fourth and final condition, you tell her the truth. Not today, maybe not even this year. But eventually, Ivy deserves to know this marriage started as an arrangement. She deserves to understand why. Even if it hurts her? Especially if it hurts her. Children aren't stupid, Mr. Mercer. They know when adults are lying. Better to hurt her with honesty than lose her trust with convenient stories." He studied her for a long moment. "You'd have made a good mother." The words landed like a punch. "Don't," Elira said sharply. "Don't make assumptions about what I would have been. We have a business arrangement to finalize, that's all." Boone had the grace to look chagrined. "You're right. I apologize." She took a breath, steadied herself. "When do we need to do this?" "Reverend Walsh will perform the ceremony tomorrow morning at 7. That gives us 3 hours before the train arrives. You already arranged it." I told him I had a bride. I just didn't mention she didn't know it yet. Despite everything, Elira felt a flicker of dark amusement. That's either confidence or insanity. Probably both. For the first time, something that might have been humor touched his eyes. It transformed his face completely, made him look almost human. Then it was gone. "I'll need to close the store," Elira said, her mind already cataloging what needed to be done. Pack my things, make arrangements. I'll help. She almost refused, but something stopped her. Maybe it was the exhaustion in his face. Maybe it was the realization that in 18 hours she'd be married to this stranger and living in a mountain cabin with his traumatized daughter. Maybe it was just too late to pretend this wasn't happening. All right, she said, but first go to Mrs. Henderson and apologize for scaring her. Then go to Walsh's boarding house and rent a room for the night. Clean yourself up. I won't marry a man who smells like he's been dead for a week. Boone looked down at himself as if seeing his condition for the first time. I came straight from the high country when I got the telegram. Didn't think about... Tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock, Elira interrupted. Church, clean clothes, trimmed beard. Can you manage that? Yes. Then go. He hesitated at the door. Miss Voss, Elira. Thank you. You're saving my daughter's life. I won't forget that. She didn't know how to respond, so she said nothing. After he left, she stood alone in the back room for a long moment, listening to the whispers starting up in the store beyond. By nightfall, the whole town would know. By morning, the gossip would be catastrophic. Elira Voss, the quiet storekeeper who never looked twice at any man, marrying Boone Mercer after a single conversation. Let them talk. She had work to do. Keats. The next 12 hours passed in a blur of activity that didn't leave room for second thoughts. Elira closed the store early, ignoring the disappointed protests. She packed her few belongings into 2 carpet bags, clothes, books, the photograph of the schoolhouse that she couldn't bring herself to leave behind. Her entire life in Redemption Ridge fit into 2 bags and a small trunk. That probably said something about the life she'd been living. Mrs. Henderson appeared at her door around sunset, wringing her hands. Elira, dear, people are saying the most awful things. They're saying you're marrying that mountain devil. Tell me it isn't true. It's true. The older woman's face went pale. But why? What hold does he have over you? If he's threatened you, we can tell Marshal Davies, no one threatened me, Helen. I'm marrying him of my own free will. But you don't even know him. Elira continued folding a shawl. How well did you know Harold before you married him? That was different. We courted properly. There were social engagements, proper chaperones. You met him in April and married him in May, Elira said mildly. 6 weeks. And you told me yourself you barely spoke 10 words to him before the wedding because you were too nervous. Mrs. Henderson's mouth worked soundlessly. I appreciate your concern, Elira continued, but my decision is made. Mr. Mercer and I have an understanding. We'll be caring for his daughter together. His daughter? Mrs. Henderson's eyes went wide. What daughter? That man doesn't have a... He does. She's arriving tomorrow from Denver. Her mother recently passed away. Understanding dawned on the older woman's face, followed quickly by something that looked like pity. Oh, Elira, you're doing this for the child. I'm doing this for several reasons. The child is one of them. You can't save them all, dear. What happened to that little girl back east? It wasn't your... Good night, Helen. Elira's voice went cold enough to freeze the words in Mrs. Henderson's throat. I need to finish packing. The older woman left, and Elira immediately felt guilty for her tone. But she couldn't afford softness right now, couldn't afford to let anyone see the cracks in her resolve. This was happening. She'd made her choice. Now she had to live with it. Mates. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat by the window watching the moonlight paint silver across the empty street, thinking about all the choices that had led her to this moment. Teaching had been her life once. She'd been good at it. Patient with slow learners, firm with troublemakers, creative in finding ways to make lessons stick. The children had loved her, but love hadn't been enough to save Clara. The little girl had come to school with bruises sometimes, flinched when anyone moved too quickly, made excuses about falling down stairs or running into doors. Elira had suspected, had watched, had even started composing a letter to the county authorities. But she'd hesitated, waited for more proof, convinced herself she might be wrong, that accusing Clara's father without evidence would make everything worse. Then came the blizzard. Clara had run away in the middle of the night, barefoot and wearing only her nightgown. By the time they found her the next morning, she'd frozen to death, curled up against the schoolhouse door, trying to get inside, trying to reach the teacher who'd noticed but hadn't acted. Alira had left Pennsylvania within the week, couldn't bear to look at the schoolhouse anymore, couldn't face the other teachers who whispered that it wasn't her fault, that she'd done nothing wrong, because she had done something wrong. She'd seen a child in danger and she'd chosen caution over courage. She wouldn't make that mistake again. Deet. Dawn came too quickly and too slowly at the same time. Alira dressed in her best clothes, a simple dress of dove-gray wool with a white collar. Not wedding white. She wasn't a bride in any real sense. This was a business arrangement dressed up in legal language, but her hands still shook as she pinned up her hair. She arrived at the church at 6:45. Reverend Walsh was waiting on the steps, looking profoundly uncomfortable. "Miss Voss, I feel compelled to ask one more time if you're entering into this union of your own free will." "I am, Reverend." "And you understand the sacred nature of marriage? The vows you'll be taking?" Alira met his eyes. "I understand that a 7-year-old girl needs a home. I understand that her father is trying to provide one. And I understand that sometimes we're called to do difficult things for the sake of children who can't save themselves." The Reverend's expression softened slightly. "Helen Henderson mentioned the child. That's why you're doing this." "Partially." "What's the other part?" Alira glanced up the street where Boone was approaching, and her breath caught despite herself. He'd actually done it. The wild mountain man had transformed into something almost civilized. He wore a dark suit that must have been borrowed. It fit reasonably well across his massive shoulders, but was slightly short in the sleeves. His beard was trimmed close to his jaw, revealing the strong bones of his face. His hair was still too long, tied back with a leather cord, but it was clean. He looked terrified. "The other part," Alira said quietly, still watching Boone approach, "is that I recognize someone trying to make amends for past failures. I respect that." Boone reached them and stopped, looking between Alira and the Reverend with the expression of a man facing execution. "Morning," he said roughly. "You look presentable, Mr. Mercer," Alira said. Something that might have been relief flickered across his face. "Borrowed the suit from Walsh at the boarding house. He's shorter than me. I noticed." An awkward silence descended. Reverend Walsh cleared his throat. "Shall we begin? I've asked my wife to serve as witness." They moved inside the small church. Mrs. Walsh sat in the front pew, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, though nothing sad had happened yet. The morning light streamed through the simple windows, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. It would have been beautiful if Alira's heart hadn't been hammering so hard she could barely breathe. Boone stood beside her, so tall she had to tilt her head back to see his face. Up close she could see the scars, one across his left eyebrow, another along his jaw, a third disappearing into his collar. The mind collapse had marked him inside and out. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Walsh began, and Alira forced herself to focus on the words rather than the surreal impossibility of what she was doing. The ceremony was brief. Walsh seemed eager to get through it quickly, as if speed might somehow make it less binding. When it came time for the vows, Boone's voice was steady. "I, Boone Mercer, take you, Alira Voss, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to provide for you, protect you, and honor you as long as this arrangement stands." Walsh's eyebrows shot up at arrangement, but he didn't interrupt. Alira took a breath. "I, Alira Voss, take you, Boone Mercer, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to help you build a home, care for your daughter, and honor the agreement we've made." It wasn't poetry, it wasn't romantic, but it was honest. "The rings?" Walsh asked. Boone produced 2 simple gold bands from his pocket. Alira wondered where he'd gotten them on such short notice, then decided she didn't want to know. He slid one onto her finger. His hands were huge, scarred, and surprisingly gentle. She did the same for him, and realized with a start that her hand was smaller than his palm. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Walsh said with obvious reluctance. "You may, that is, it's customary to—" "No," Boone said quickly, seeing the panic in Alira's eyes. "That won't be necessary." Walsh looked relieved. "Then I suppose you're married. Congratulations." It was possibly the least enthusiastic blessing ever given. They signed the certificate in Walsh's office. Alira's hand shook as she wrote her name, but the signature was legible. Boone signed with surprising precision, his handwriting better than she'd expected. When it was done, Reverend Walsh handed them the paper. I'll file this with the county clerk this afternoon, he said. In the eyes of the law in heaven, you're now man and wife. Elira stared at the certificate, her name next to his, 2 signatures binding them together. What had she done? We need to go, Boone said quietly. Train arrives in 2 hours. We should meet with Judge Morrison first. Show him the certificate, then head to the station. Right. The reason for all this? Ivy. They thanked the Reverend and stepped out into the cool morning air. The street was beginning to come alive. Shop owners opening shutters, the baker lighting his ovens, children running errands before school. Normal people doing normal things. While Elira stood on the church steps next to the man she'd just married, feeling like she'd stepped off the edge of the world and hadn't hit bottom yet. You all right? Boone asked. No, she said honestly, but I will be. Let's go see Judge Morrison. They walked through town side by side, not touching but close enough that people stared. News of the wedding had already spread. Elira saw curtains twitching, conversations stopping mid-sentence, heads turning to follow their progress. Let them stare. Judge Morrison's office was in the courthouse, a 2-story brick building that served as the center of Redemption Ridge's limited legal system. The judge himself was a barrel-chested man in his 60s with impressive mutton chops and a reputation for fairness that bordered on legendary. He looked up when they entered and set down his coffee cup with exaggerated care. Well, Boone Mercer, and I presume this is the mysterious fiancée you mentioned yesterday? My wife, Boone corrected, handing over the certificate. We were married this morning. Morrison studied the paper, his eyebrows climbing steadily higher. Elira Voss, the woman who runs the general store. Yes, sir, Elira said. Known you for 6 years, Miss. Mrs. Mercer, I should say. Didn't know you and Boone here had even met. We hadn't, Elira said calmly. Not properly, but circumstances don't always allow for lengthy courtships. Circumstances. Morrison's gaze sharpened, meaning the child arriving on this morning's train. My daughter, Boone said. There was steel in his voice now. Ivy, and yes, her arrival is why I needed to marry quickly. But don't mistake speed for deception, Judge. This marriage is legal and binding. Morrison leaned back in his chair, studying them both. Legal, certainly. Binding, we'll see. I'm not a fool, Boone. I know what this looks like. Looks like a man trying to keep his daughter, Boone said flatly. Looks like a marriage of convenience that'll dissolve the moment my authority is removed. Morrison shifted his attention to Elira. Mrs. Mercer, do you understand what you've agreed to? Living in an isolated cabin with a man known for violence and instability, caring for a traumatized child you've never met? I understand perfectly, Judge Morrison. And you're prepared for the reality of it, the hardship, the isolation? Elira thought about the empty room above her store, the endless days of selling goods to people who never really knew her, the nights spent reading alone by lamplight, trying not to think about the child she'd failed. I've been isolated for 6 years, Judge. At least now I'll have a purpose. Something in her voice must have convinced him because Morrison's expression softened slightly. All right, I'll approve the placement on one condition. I want to see this family in 6 months. Visit the cabin, speak to the child, ensure she's being properly cared for. If I find evidence of neglect or abuse, I'll remove her immediately and the marriage certificate won't protect you. Understood? Understood, Boone and Elira said in unison. Morrison signed the necessary papers and handed them over. The train arrives at 10:15. I'll meet you at the station to finalize the transfer of custody. Don't be late. They left the courthouse and stood on the street, legally married for less than an hour, about to become parents to a child neither of them really knew. We should eat something, Boone said. It'll be a long day. They went to the small cafe near the station. The morning crowd fell silent when they entered, but Boone ignored them with the practiced ease of a man used to being the subject of whispers. They ordered coffee and biscuits and sat across from each other in awkward silence. Finally, Elira spoke. Tell me about her. Ivy. What do you know? Boone pulled a worn photograph from his pocket and slid it across the table. A little girl stared back from the image. Dark hair and braids, serious eyes, a small, uncertain smile. Catherine sent this with the telegram, Boone said quietly. It's 6 months old. The lawyer said Ivy's smart, reads above her grade level, likes drawing and animals. She's been helping care for her mother during the illness, so she's used to responsibility. She's 7, Alira said. She shouldn't have had to care for anyone. No. Boone's jaw tightened. She shouldn't, but her mother was dying and they had no family, so she did what she had to do. Alira traced the edge of the photograph with one finger. She looks like you. The eyes. Yeah. Something painful crossed Boone's face. Catherine used to say Ivy had my stubborn streak too. Wouldn't accept help even when she needed it. Sounds familiar. Their eyes met, and for a moment understanding passed between them. Two stubborn people who'd rather suffer alone than accept help, raising a child who'd probably inherited that same damn tendency. This was going to be interesting. The cafe door opened and Marshall Davies stepped in, his eyes immediately finding them. He crossed the room with deliberate slowness. Boone, Alira, heard congratulations are in order. News travels fast, Alira said. In a town this size, Davies pulled up a chair without being invited. Helen Henderson was knocking on doors by dawn. Half the territory knows by now. He fixed Boone with a hard stare. I'm going to ask you this once. Is she doing this willingly? Ask her yourself, Boone said evenly. Davies turned to Alira. Well, no one forced me, Jacob. I made my own choice. For the child, among other reasons. Davies shook his head slowly. You're either the bravest woman I've ever met, or the most foolish. Time will tell which. He stood. But know this, Boone. If anything happens to her, if I hear even a whisper that you've raised a hand or spoken a harsh word, I'll come for you, and I won't be gentle about it. Understood, Boone said without heat. But you won't hear whispers because there won't be cause for them. Davies looked like he wanted to say more, but footsteps on the platform outside interrupted them. The train was early. They all turned toward the window. Black smoke rose above the buildings, accompanied by the shriek of the whistle. 10:15 had become 9:47. Ivy was here. Alira's heart kicked into a faster rhythm. Beside her, Boone had gone absolutely rigid, his knuckles white where he gripped the table edge. Ready? She asked quietly. No. His voice was hoarse. But it doesn't matter. Let's go. They left money on the table and stepped out into the cool morning. Judge Morrison was already hurrying toward the station, official documents clutched in his hand. The train hissed to a stop, steam billowing across the platform. Doors opened. Passengers began disembarking. And then Alira saw her. A tiny figure in a black dress too large for her frame, carrying a single battered carpet bag. Dark braids tied with faded ribbons. Those same serious eyes from the photograph, but older somehow. Sadder. Ivy Mercer stood alone on the platform, looking small and lost and utterly terrified. Boone made a sound low in his throat, half sob, half something else entirely. Then he was moving, crossing the platform in long strides that ate up the distance. Ivy saw him coming and froze. Father and daughter stared at each other. 7 years of absence hanging between them. 7 years of letters unread and a life built without him. Boone dropped to one knee so he'd be at her level. Ivy, he said, and his voice broke on her name. I'm your father. The little girl's face didn't change. I know who you are. The coldness in her voice would have frozen a lesser man, but Boone didn't flinch. Your mother, she told you about me? She told me you left, that you didn't want us. Direct hit. Alira saw it land like a physical blow. That's not... Boone stopped, closed his eyes, tried again. I left because I was broken and stupid and convinced myself it was for the best. But I was wrong, Ivy. I was so wrong. Your mother deserved better. You deserved better. But you didn't come back. No, I didn't. Boone's hands clenched on his knees. I can't change that. Can't undo it. All I can do is promise that I'm here now and I'm not leaving again. Ivy's lower lip trembled. Mama said people who leave always leave again. Alira's chest tightened painfully. Your mama was right to be careful, Boone said. Right to protect you. But I'm asking for a chance to prove I'm different. To prove I want to know you, to be your father, if you'll let me. I don't need a father. The words came out fierce and small at the same time. I took care of Mama. I can take care of myself. Before Boone could respond, Judge Morrison stepped forward. Miss Mercer, my name is Judge Morrison. I'm here to ensure you're placed in a safe, stable home. Your father has made arrangements. He's not my father. Ivy's voice cut like glass. Fathers don't abandon their families. The platform had gone silent. Every passenger, every worker, every person within earshot was watching this devastating little drama unfold. Elira couldn't stand it anymore. She stepped forward, kneeling beside Boone so she was eye level with Ivy. Hello, she said quietly. My name is Elira. You're absolutely right. Your father made terrible mistakes. He hurt you and your mother. You don't have to forgive him for that. You don't have to call him father if you don't want to. Ivy's gaze shifted to her, wary but listening. But here's the truth, Elira continued. You're 7 years old. You just lost your mother. You're scared and angry and probably tired of adults making decisions for you without asking what you want. I understand that. So I'm going to give you a choice. Judge Morrison started to object, but Elira silenced him with a look. You can come home with us, she said to Ivy, to a cabin in the mountains where we'll do our best to take care of you. It won't be perfect. We'll make mistakes, but we'll try. Or, she held up a hand when Morrison sputtered, you can tell Judge Morrison that you'd prefer the orphanage in Sacramento. I won't lie and say it'll be comfortable, but it'll be yours to choose. Elira, Boone said sharply, what are you— Letting her have some control over her own life, Elira said without looking at him. Something adults rarely give children. Ivy stared at her for a long moment. Those gray eyes, so like Boone's, searched Elira's face as if looking for deception. Who are you? The little girl finally asked. I'm your father's wife, as of about 2 hours ago. Ivy's eyes widened. You married him. Why? Honest question. Deserved an honest answer. Because he asked for help, and I was in a position to give it. Because I believe children deserve safe homes. And because— Elira hesitated, then continued. Because a long time ago, I failed a little girl who needed help. I don't want to fail another one. Something shifted in Ivy's expression. Understanding, maybe. Or recognition that she was talking to another damaged person. If I come with you, Ivy said slowly, and I don't like it, can I leave? Elira glanced at Judge Morrison, who looked ready to have an apoplexy, but nodded reluctantly. In 6 months, Judge Morrison will visit to make sure you're being cared for properly. If you tell him you're unhappy or unsafe, he'll listen. This isn't a prison, Ivy. It's meant to be a home. The little girl looked between Elira and Boone, her small face grave with a decision no 7-year-old should have to make. Then her gaze dropped to the carpet bag she clutched. Mama's things are in here, she whispered. Her brush, her book, her locket. I can't leave them. You won't have to, Boone said hoarsely. Anything you want to keep, you keep. I swear it. Ivy's eyes filled with tears she was clearly fighting not to shed. I want to see where we're going, she said finally, before I decide. Judge Morrison looked like he wanted to argue, but Elira spoke first. That's fair. Our cabin is about 3 hours from town by wagon. We'll take you there, let you see it, and you can tell the judge your decision when he visits in 6 months. Does that work? Ivy nodded slowly. Morrison sighed. Against my better judgment, I'll allow it. But I'll be watching this situation closely. He handed Boone the official custody papers. Don't make me regret this. They collected Ivy's single bag, heartbreaking how little remained of her entire life, and walked to where Boone had left his wagon. It was a sturdy vehicle, clearly built for mountain roads. The horse hitched to it was a massive bay gelding with patient eyes. Boone lifted Ivy into the back where he'd arranged blankets to make a nest of sorts. She sat stiffly, not looking at either of them. Elira climbed up front while Boone took the reins. And then they were moving, leaving Redemption Ridge behind. Leaving behind Elira's old life. Heading into mountains and marriage and motherhood, all with a man she barely knew and a child who had every right to hate them both. The wagon creaked. The horse's hooves clopped steadily against packed dirt. Behind them, Ivy sat in silence, watching the town disappear. And Elira realized with crystal clarity that there was no going back now. Whatever happened next, they'd face it together. Or they'd fail together. But either way, she'd made her choice. The wagon climbed into country that seemed to exist outside normal time. Pine forests pressed close to the narrow road. their shadows deep and cool even in midday light. The air changed, thinner, sharper, carrying the smell of snow that hadn't fallen yet but would soon. Elira watched the landscape transform and felt her stomach tighten with each mile that separated them from town. This wasn't the gentle rolling hills around Redemption Ridge. This was wilderness that could kill you if you weren't careful. Boone handled the reins with practiced ease, guiding the wagon around rocks and fallen branches that would have shattered an axle. He hadn't spoken since they left town, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw kept clenching. Behind them, Ivy remained silent. Elira turned to check on her and found the little girl staring out at the forest with hollow eyes. Her carpet bag sat clutched in her lap like a life preserver. "Are you hungry?" Elira asked. "I packed some—" "No?" The word was flat, final. "Thirsty? The ride is—" "I said no." Elira exchanged a glance with Boone. His expression was grim but unsurprised. This wasn't going to be easy. They continued in silence for another hour before Boone finally spoke. "There's a stream up ahead. We should water the horse." He pulled the wagon off the road into a small clearing where water ran clear over smooth stones. The bay gelding drank gratefully while Boone stretched his back, bones cracking audibly. Ivy climbed down without being asked and walked to the stream's edge, keeping her distance from both adults. "She hates me," Boone said quietly. He wasn't looking for contradiction, just stating a fact. "She doesn't know you well enough to hate you," Elira replied. "Right now she's just angry and scared and grieving her mother. Give her time." "What if time isn't enough?" Elira didn't have an answer for that. She pulled out the food she'd packed, bread, cheese, dried apples. Simple traveling fare. She brought some to Ivy, crouching beside her at the water's edge. "You should eat something," she said gently. "It's still a long ride." "I'm not hungry." "I know, but your body needs fuel even when your heart doesn't want it. Your mother would want you to take care of yourself." Ivy's head snapped up, eyes blazing. "Don't talk about my mother. You didn't know her." "You're right, I didn't. But I know she raised a daughter strong enough to survive losing her. That tells me everything I need to know about what kind of woman she was." Some of the fire went out of Ivy's expression, replaced by something more complicated. Grief, maybe. Or the terrible exhaustion that comes from trying to be strong for too long. She took the bread. Small victory. They ate in silence, then climbed back into the wagon. The road grew steeper, forcing the horse to lean into the harness. Boone walked beside the wagon now, easing the load, his boots finding purchase on rocks Elira would have slipped on. The man knew this country like it was written in his bones. Another hour passed. The sun shifted westward, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Beautiful, if you had the luxury of appreciating it. Elira was too focused on the drop-off beside the road, a sheer fall into nothing that made her palms sweat. Then the road rounded a bend, and the cabin came into view. It sat in a small valley sheltered by towering pines, backed against a cliff face that would protect it from the worst winter winds. A stream ran nearby, the same one they'd stopped at earlier, Elira realized, following it upstream. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin, welcoming line. Someone had been here recently. "I came up yesterday," Boone said, reading her confusion. "Got the fire going, stocked wood, made sure everything was ready." He paused. "Wanted her to arrive to a warm home." Elira's throat tightened unexpectedly. The cabin itself was larger than she'd expected. Solidly built from local timber, the logs chinked tight against winter cold. A covered porch ran along the front. The roof looked sound, the windows intact. It wasn't grand, but it was well-made and well-maintained, the work of a man who knew how to survive. Boone brought the wagon to a stop and Ivy climbed down, looking at the cabin with an expression Elira couldn't read. "This is it," Boone said. There was uncertainty in his voice now, like he was seeing the place through her eyes and finding it wanting. "It's not much, but it's quiet," Ivy interrupted. She walked toward the cabin slowly, as if approaching something that might bite. "Mama and me lived in a boarding house in Denver. There were always people, noise, shouting through the walls at night." She reached the porch steps and stopped. "Is it always this quiet?" "Mostly," Boone said. "Sometimes you hear animals, owls at night. Elk in the meadow come dawn, wind through the pines, but no people, no shouting." Ivy nodded slowly, processing this. Then she climbed the steps and pushed open the door. Elira and Boone followed, watching as the little girl took in her new home. The main room was dominated by a stone fireplace where a fire crackled warmly. Simple furniture, a table, chairs, a worn sofa. Shelves lined one wall, mostly empty but clean. The floor was swept, the windows clear. A door on the left led to the bedroom. Ivy walked to it like a ghost and pushed it open. Elira heard her gasp. The room beyond was small but carefully prepared. A bed with a handmade quilt in shades of blue and green. Shelves built at a child's height. A small table beneath the window with a chair sized for someone Ivy's age. And beside the bed, a rocking chair that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of wood, polished until it gleamed. But it was what sat on the bed that made Ivy's composure finally crack. Wooden animals. Dozens of them, carved with meticulous care. A deer with delicate antlers. A rabbit mid-hop. A fox with a bushy tail. An owl with individual feathers carved so finely they looked like they might ruffle in a breeze. Ivy picked up the deer with shaking hands. "You made these," she whispered. Boone stood in the doorway, looking like he wanted to run. Yeah, thought you might like them. Your mother's letter, the one I finally read. She mentioned you liked animals, drew pictures of them. She said I got that from you." Ivy's voice was barely audible. "Said you used to carve things, that you had gentle hands for such a big man." Boone's eyes closed briefly, pain etched into every line of his face. Ivy set the deer down carefully and turned to look at him. Really look at him, maybe for the first time since the train platform. "Why didn't you read her letters?" The question came out small and wounded. "If you loved her like you said, why didn't you at least read them?" Boone moved into the room slowly, like approaching a wild animal. He knelt so he'd be at her level, the same way he had at the station. "Because I was a coward," he said simply. "The mind collapse. It broke something in me. I couldn't sleep in enclosed spaces anymore. Couldn't breathe right. Had nightmares where I was buried alive and everyone I loved was dying around me in the dark. Your mother deserved someone whole and I was shattered. Thought if I stayed away she could find someone better. Someone who wasn't waking up screaming every night." "But she loved you," Ivy said, and now tears were sliding down her face. "She kept your picture by her bed. She told me stories about you, about how you made her laugh, how you promised to build her a house in the mountains where she could see the stars." Boone's breath hitched. "She remembered that? She remembered everything, and she forgave you. Even when she was dying, she said—" Ivy's voice broke. "She said you were probably suffering somewhere and she wished she could help you. She made me promise not to hate you." "Ivy, Mom." "But I do hate you." The words burst out of her like a dam breaking. "I hate that you left. I hate that she worked herself sick trying to provide for us alone. I hate that you weren't there when she died. I hate that I'm here with strangers instead of with her. I hate all of it." She was sobbing now, great heaving sobs that shook her small frame. Boone looked utterly lost, his hands hovering uselessly like he wanted to reach for her but didn't know if he had the right. Elira made the decision for him. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Ivy, pulling the child against her. Ivy fought for a moment, then collapsed into the embrace, crying so hard Elira worried she might make herself sick. "That's right," Elira murmured, stroking the girl's hair. "Let it out. You've been holding it in too long." Boone knelt beside them, one large hand coming to rest gently on Ivy's back. The little girl stiffened at the touch, but didn't pull away. They stayed like that while Ivy cried herself out. 3 broken people holding each other in a bedroom that smelled like pine and new beginnings. When the sobs finally subsided into hiccups, Ivy pulled back slightly, wiping her face with her sleeve. "I'm tired," she whispered. "Then sleep," Elira said gently. "We'll be right outside if you need us." But Ivy shook her head. "Don't leave. Not yet. I don't want to be alone." So they stayed. Elira helped Ivy out of her traveling clothes and into a nightgown she found in the carpet bag, worn soft from many washings, probably one of the last things her mother had packed for her. Ivy climbed into bed and Elira tucked the quilt around her, the same way she used to tuck in her students during rest time back when she was a teacher. Back before Clara. Boone sat in the rocking chair looking completely out of place in the delicate piece of furniture he'd built. But he sat anyway, and when Ivy's eyes started to drift closed, he began to talk. Not a story exactly, just words. He told her about the mountains in winter, when snow piled so high you had to dig tunnels to the woodshed, about the elk herd that came through every spring with their new calves, about the fox family that lived in the rocks behind the cabin and sometimes left half-eaten rabbits on the porch like gifts. His voice was low and rough, but there was something soothing in the steady rumble of it. Ivy's breathing deepened, evened out. Sleep, finally. Alira stood carefully, not wanting to wake her, and moved toward the door. Boone followed, and together they stepped out into the main room, pulling the bedroom door almost closed but leaving it cracked. The silence that fell between them was heavy with things unsaid. "Thank you," Boone said finally, for knowing what to do back there. I didn't— "You did fine," Elira interrupted. "You told her the truth. You let her be angry. That's what she needed. She hates me. She's grieving. There's a difference." Elira moved to the fireplace, warming her hands against the chill that was settling into her bones. "Give her time to sort through it." Boone paced the room like a caged animal. "What if I can't do this? What if I'm not capable of being what she needs?" "Then you'll fail," Elira said bluntly. "But at least you'll fail trying, which is more than you did before." He stopped pacing, stung. Good. He needed to hear it. "I'm not going to coddle you, Boone. You made choices that hurt people. You can't undo that. All you can do is make better choices now and hope they're enough." "And if they're not?" Elira met his eyes. "Then I'll take Ivy somewhere safe, and you'll sign whatever papers are necessary to give me custody. That was the deal. The child comes first." Something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe, or the beginning of trust. "Fair enough," he said. They stood in silence for a moment, then Boone cleared his throat awkwardly. "You should take the bedroom tonight. I'll sleep out here by the fire." "We can't. Ivy needs to feel secure in that room, like it's hers." "Then where—" "We'll figure it out." Elira looked around the cabin, assessing. The sofa was too small for either of them to sleep comfortably. The floor was an option, but not a good one. Her gaze landed on the loft above the main room, accessible by a ladder, open to the room below but separate. "Up there," she said. "We can put bedrolls in the loft, close enough to hear Ivy if she needs us, far enough to give her space." Boone nodded slowly. "I've got extra blankets. I'll set it up." While he climbed the ladder with armfuls of bedding, Elira unpacked the few things she'd brought. Her clothes went into a trunk in the corner, her books on a shelf. The photograph of the schoolhouse she placed face down in the bottom of the trunk, unable to display it but unwilling to leave it behind. She was hanging the last of her dresses when she heard a small sound from the bedroom. A whimper. Elira moved quickly, pushing the door open to find Ivy thrashing in bed, caught in a nightmare. Her face was twisted with fear, small hands clutching the quilt. "No," she was mumbling. "Mama, no. Please don't go." Elira sat on the edge of the bed and gently touched Ivy's shoulder. "Ivy, wake up. You're dreaming." The little girl's eyes flew open, wide and terrified. For a moment, she didn't seem to recognize where she was, and panic flooded her features. "It's all right," Elira said softly. "You're safe. You're in the cabin. I'm right here." Ivy's breathing gradually slowed. She looked around the dark room at the wooden animals on the shelf, at Elira's face. "I dreamed Mama was calling for me, but I couldn't find her," she whispered. "She kept getting farther away, and I kept running, but I couldn't reach her. I'm so sorry." Elira smoothed the hair back from Ivy's forehead. "Those dreams are the worst kind. Do they ever stop?" The honest answer was no. Elira still sometimes dreamed of Clara frozen against the schoolhouse door, but that wasn't what Ivy needed to hear. "They get easier," she said instead. "Less frequent, and eventually you'll have other dreams too. Good ones mixed in with the hard ones." Ivy was quiet for a moment. Then, "Will you stay? Until I fall back asleep?" "Of course." Elira settled into the rocking chair, still warm from where Boone had sat earlier, and began to rock slowly. The motion was soothing, almost meditative. "Elira?" Ivy's voice was small in the darkness. "Yes?" "Why did you really marry him? It wasn't just to help a stranger. Nobody does that." "Smart child. Too smart." Elira considered lying, then remembered her own advice to Boone. Truth, even when it hurt. "A long time ago I was a school teacher," she said quietly. "I had a student who was being hurt at home. I suspected it, but I didn't act fast enough. She ran away one night during a storm and died trying to reach safety. I've carried that failure with me ever since." Ivy was very still, listening. "When your father told me about you," Elira continued, "about a little girl who needed a home, I saw a chance to do something right, to help a child when it mattered instead of hesitating until it was too late. So I'm like, your second chance?" "No." Elira shook her head firmly. "You're not a chance to fix my past. You're a person who deserves a safe home and adults who will fight for you. I'm helping because it's the right thing to do, not because I'm trying to ease my conscience." "But it does ease it," Ivy said. "A little bit, doesn't it?" The girl was 7 years old and reading Elira like a book. "Yes," Elira admitted. "A little bit. Is that wrong?" Ivy thought about it. "I don't think so. Mama used to say people can do good things for complicated reasons, and they're still good things." "Your mother sounds like she was very wise." "She was." Ivy's voice thickened with grief. "She was the best person I ever knew, and now she's gone, and I'm stuck with strangers in the middle of nowhere." The words should have hurt, but Elira understood them for what they were, a child speaking her truth, raw and unfiltered. "We are strangers," Elira agreed, "and this is nowhere, relatively speaking. But strangers can become family if everyone works at it, and sometimes nowhere is exactly where you need to be." Ivy didn't respond, but her breathing was starting to even out again. Elira kept rocking until she was certain the girl was asleep, then carefully stood and moved toward the door. "Elira?" Apparently not asleep after all. "What is it?" "The animals he carved. They're really good." "They are." Does that mean maybe he's not all bad?" Elira's heart twisted. "No one is all bad, Ivy, or all good. We're all just people doing the best we can with what we've been given. Your father made terrible mistakes, but he's here now trying. That counts for something." "I guess." This time when Ivy's breathing deepened, it stayed deep. Elira slipped out of the room and found Boone standing by the fireplace, clearly having heard everything. "She doesn't trust me," he said. "Would you, in her position?" "No." "Then stop expecting her to. Trust is earned, Boone. You know that." He nodded slowly, then gestured to the loft. "I made up 2 separate sleeping areas. You'll have privacy." Elira climbed the ladder and found he'd created a division using a blanket hung from the rafters. Her bedroll was on one side, his on the other. It wasn't perfect, but it would work. She changed into her nightgown behind the blanket partition, hyper-aware of Boone doing the same on his side. This was her life now. Married to a stranger, sleeping feet away from him, caring for a traumatized child together. She lay down on the bedroll and stared up at the roof beams. How had her life become this? 2 days ago, she'd been running a store, living in comfortable isolation, answering to no one. Now she was a wife and a mother, and living in a cabin so far from civilization that the nearest neighbor was probably a bear. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: purpose. From the other side of the blanket, Boone's voice came quietly. "Elira?" "Yes?" "Thank you for everything you did today, for giving her choices, for being honest with her, for knowing what to say when I didn't." "We're in this together," Elira said. "That was the agreement." "Still, thank you." She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Sleep came slowly, and when it finally arrived, it brought dreams of schoolhouses and frozen children and little girls with dark braids who looked at her with Catherine's dying hope in their eyes. Morning came too early, announced by weak sunlight through the loft window and the smell of coffee. Elira climbed down the ladder to find Boone already up, tending the fire and doing something complicated with a cast-iron pan. "Thought I'd make breakfast," he said without turning. "Nothing fancy, just eggs and bacon." "Where did you get eggs up here?" "Keep chickens in a coop behind the cabin. They're temperamental, but they produce." Of course he kept chickens. Of course this mountain recluse had a fully functioning homestead hidden in the wilderness. Elira moved to check on Ivy and found her still sleeping, curled around one of the wooden animals. The deer, she noticed. She pulled the door closed quietly and returned to the main room. "How long have you lived up here?" she asked. 7 years, since the collapse." Boone flipped bacon with practiced ease. "Built the cabin myself that first winter. Nearly died doing it, but I needed something to occupy my hands, something to focus on besides the memories. You built all of this alone? Had help from a few trappers who passed through. But mostly, yeah. He glanced around the cabin with something that might have been pride. It's solid. Weathered 6 winters without major problems. Keeps out the cold. Keeps out the world. But you can't keep out the world anymore, Elira said softly. Not with Ivy here. His shoulders tensed. I know. They ate breakfast in silence. Boone had scrambled the eggs with wild onions, and the bacon was perfectly crisp. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint. Ivy emerged from the bedroom while Elira was washing dishes in a basin by the fireplace. The little girl looked rumpled and sad, but more rested than yesterday. Morning, Elira said. Hungry? I guess. Boone dished up eggs and bacon, setting the plate at the table. Ivy sat and ate mechanically, not tasting the food, just fueling her body. When she finished, she looked at Boone directly for the first time that morning. What am I supposed to do here? She asked. All day. There's nothing. No school, no other kids. No, there's school, Boone interrupted. I can't teach you proper, but I've got books. Reading, arithmetic, some history, and Elira was a teacher. She can teach you, Elira finished, surprised he'd remembered. If you're willing to learn. Ivy considered this. What kind of books? I'll show you. Boone led them to a shelf Elira hadn't noticed before, hidden in a corner of the main room. It was packed with volumes, worn but well cared for. Ivy's eyes widened. There were primers and readers, mathematics texts, natural philosophy, even poetry. A better collection than Elira would have expected. Catherine loved books, Boone said quietly. Before I left, she was always reading. I kept buying them after. Told myself maybe someday I'd send them to her. Never did, of course. But I kept buying them. Ivy pulled out a volume of fairy tales, the cover decorated with faded gilt. She opened it carefully and found an inscription on the first page. For Catherine, who sees magic in everything. Love always be. The little girl's face crumpled. She would have loved this, she whispered. Then it's yours, Boone said. All of them. Whatever you want to read. Ivy clutched the book to her chest and fled back to the bedroom, slamming the door. Boone flinched. Give her time, Elira said again. She seemed to be saying that a lot. The rest of the day was spent in careful negotiation of space and silence. Ivy stayed in her room, reading. Boone chopped wood with punishing intensity, working out his helplessness through physical labor. Elira explored the cabin and the immediate surroundings, trying to understand this place that was now her home. The chickens were indeed temperamental. One tried to peck her when she collected eggs. The stream ran clear and cold, perfect for washing. There was a root cellar stocked with preserved vegetables and dried meat. A smokehouse. A small barn where the bay gelding lived alongside a milk cow that Elira hadn't known existed. Boone had built an entire life up here. A lonely life, but a sustainable one. As the sun started to sink toward the western peaks, Elira returned to the cabin to find Ivy sitting on the porch steps, the fairy tale book open in her lap. Mind if I sit? Elira asked. Ivy shrugged. Not permission, but not refusal either. Elira settled on the step beside her. They sat in companionable silence, watching shadows lengthen across the valley. It's pretty here, Ivy said eventually. Quieter than I thought anything could be. Does that bother you? I don't know yet. Ask me in a week. Fair enough. What are you reading? Elira asked. Rapunzel. Mama used to read it to me when I was little. Ivy's finger traced the illustration of the girl in the tower. I never liked this story. The girl just waits for someone to save her, doesn't even try to save herself. What would you do if you were Rapunzel? Ivy thought about it. Cut my own hair, braid it into a rope, climb down myself. Elira smiled. Practical. Mama said I was too practical sometimes. Said I should let myself dream more. The sadness was back in Ivy's voice. But dreams don't keep you fed or warm. They don't pay for medicine when someone's sick. 7 years old and already too familiar with hard realities. Your mother was right that you need dreams, Elira said gently. But she'd also be proud of how strong you've had to become. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. What does that mean? It means you can be both practical and a dreamer. Take care of yourself and still hope for better things. Ivy closed the book. Do you hope for better things? The question caught Elira off guard. Did she? She'd spent 6 years just existing, not hoping, not dreaming, just moving through days and trying not to think about what she'd lost. I'm starting to, she said slowly. Being here with you and your father, it's making me think maybe I can do more than just survive. That's good, I guess. Ivy stood, brushing off her dress. I'm going inside. It's getting cold. She left Elira on the porch, and a moment later Boone emerged from the woodshed, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the chill. She talking to you now? He asked. A little. She's processing. How long does processing usually take? However long it takes. Elira stood, joints protesting. There's no timeline for grief, Boone. She'll move through it at her own pace. He nodded, looking exhausted. That night followed the same pattern as the night before. Ivy had another nightmare. Elira comforted her until she fell back asleep, then retreated to the loft where she lay awake listening to Boone's breathing on the other side of the blanket partition. This was her life now. She should have been miserable. Instead, she felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. It took her a while to identify it. Hope. The days began to establish a rhythm. Elira would wake early and start breakfast while Boone did the morning chores, feeding animals, collecting eggs, chopping wood. Ivy would emerge eventually, still heavy with sleep and grief, and eat whatever was put in front of her without complaint or enthusiasm. After breakfast, Elira began teaching. She started with assessment, figuring out where Ivy was in her education. The girl could read well above her age level, and her mathematics was solid, but her handwriting was shaky and her knowledge of history was spotty. They set up a school area at the table by the window, where natural light was best. It was strange teaching again after so many years. Strange and painful and oddly healing. Ivy was a good student, quick to understand, eager to learn despite her grief. She absorbed information like someone starving for mental stimulation. During lessons, Boone would disappear into the forest, checking his trap lines or hunting. He always came back before dark, usually with fresh meat or firewood or some other necessity. The man was relentlessly practical, but in the evenings, after dinner, he would sit by the fire and carve, while Elira read aloud to Ivy. He never said much, just worked his knife over wood with steady, practiced movements, occasionally glancing up when a particularly good passage caught his attention. Ivy started requesting specific stories, adventure tales mostly, stories about brave girls who saved themselves. She still kept her distance from Boone, but Elira noticed the glances, the way Ivy would watch him carve, fascinated despite herself, the way her eyes would track him when he moved around the cabin. The child was curious about her father, even if she wouldn't admit it. A week passed, then 2. The first snow came on a Tuesday morning, soft flakes that transformed the valley into something from a fairy tale. Ivy stood at the window transfixed. I've never seen this much snow, she breathed. Denver gets snow, Boone said from his spot by the fire. Not like this. Not where everything is quiet and white and perfect. She ran outside without her coat, spinning in circles with her face turned up to catch snowflakes on her tongue. For the first time since arriving, she laughed. The sound hit Boone like a physical blow. Elira saw it in his face, pure joy mixed with devastating regret for all the laughter he'd missed. But he didn't let it show. Just watched his daughter play in the snow with an expression of such fierce longing that Elira had to look away. That night, Ivy fell asleep almost as soon as her head hit the pillow, exhausted from playing outside. No nightmares for once. In the loft, Elira and Boone lay in their separate spaces, the blanket partition between them. Thank you, Boone said into the darkness. For what? For today. For teaching her. For being patient. For making this work. Elira stared at the ceiling. It's been 2 weeks. That's not exactly a success story yet. She laughed today. First time since... He didn't finish the sentence. They fell silent. Then, softly, Boone spoke again. Do you ever regret it? Agreeing to this? Elira considered the question honestly. Did she regret marrying a stranger, leaving her quiet life, taking responsibility for a grieving child? No, she said finally. It's hard. It's complicated. But I don't regret it. Why not? Because for the first time in 6 years, I wake up with a purpose beyond just getting through the day. That matters. Another long silence. I'm glad you're here, Illyra. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Good night, Boone. Good night. But sleep didn't come easily, and Illyra found herself thinking about the man on the other side of the blanket, about the care he put into carving animals for his daughter, about the way he looked at Ivy when he thought no one was watching, like she was something precious and breakable that he was terrified of dropping. He wasn't what she'd expected when she agreed to this arrangement. He was better. And that was terrifying in its own way. 3 weeks into their strange new life, Ivy started leaving her bedroom door open at night. It was a small thing, barely noticeable. But Illyra noticed. She noticed everything about the child now. The way Ivy's nightmares had decreased from nightly to every few days, how she'd stopped flinching when Boone moved too quickly, the fact that she sometimes hummed while doing her schoolwork. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. The weather turned colder. Snow fell more frequently, blanketing the valley in layers of white that made the world feel smaller and quieter. Boone spent more time inside, teaching Ivy how to carve wood by the fireplace while Illyra prepared meals or mended clothes. She'd never been much for domestic work back in Redemption Ridge, but here it felt different, purposeful, like she was building something instead of just maintaining. One afternoon, while Ivy was absorbed in carving what might have been a rabbit or possibly a very lumpy dog, Boone caught Illyra's eye across the room. Need to check the trap lines tomorrow, he said. Up in the high country. Might be gone most of the day. Illyra nodded, understanding what he wasn't saying. He was asking if she'd be all right alone with Ivy, if she could handle it. We'll be fine, she said. Ivy looked up from her carving. Can I come? The question caught them both off guard. Boone's expression cycled through surprise, uncertainty, and something that looked dangerously close to hope before settling on caution. It's a hard climb, he said carefully. Cold. Takes most of the day. I'm not scared of cold. Ivy's chin lifted in that stubborn way Illyra had come to recognize. And I can climb. I'm stronger than I look. It's not about strength. It's about, you don't want me there. The walls went back up in Ivy's eyes. That's fine. I didn't really want to go anyway. She turned back to her carving, but her hands were shaking. Boone looked at Illyra, clearly out of his depth. Actually, Illyra said, thinking fast, I was hoping to reorganize the root cellar tomorrow. Could use your help, Ivy. Some of those preserve jars are too high for me to reach comfortably. It was a transparent lie. Illyra could reach the shelves perfectly fine, but it gave Ivy a graceful exit. The girl hesitated, then nodded. Okay. Boone left before dawn the next morning. Illyra woke to the sound of the cabin door closing and lay in the darkness of the loft, listening to his footsteps crunch through snow as he headed into the forest. When she climbed down the ladder, she found Ivy already awake, sitting at the table with the fairy tale book open but not reading. Couldn't sleep? Illyra asked. Kept thinking about Mama. Ivy's voice was small. She died 6 weeks ago today. 6 weeks. Had it really only been 6 weeks since this child's entire world had collapsed? Illyra sat across from her. Tell me about her. Ivy looked up, surprised. What do you want to know? Anything. Everything. What was she like? For a moment, Ivy didn't speak. Then slowly words began to spill out. Catherine had loved books and music. She'd worked as a seamstress, spending long hours hunched over delicate stitching that ruined her eyes and bent her spine. She sang while she worked, old songs from her childhood that Ivy still remembered. She made the best apple cake in Denver, according to their landlady. She taught Ivy to read before she was 4 years old. She was tired all the time near the end, Ivy said, her voice breaking. But she still tried to smile, still told me stories before bed, still promised everything would be okay, even though we both knew it wouldn't be. She sounds like she loved you very much. She did. Ivy wiped her eyes fiercely. She was all I had, and now she's gone, and I'm here with him, the man who left her, left us. There it was, the anger that lived beneath the grief. Can I tell you something? Illyra asked gently. Something I learned the hard way? Ivy nodded. Anger is easier than sadness. It feels stronger, more powerful. When you're angry, you can blame someone for your pain instead of just feeling it. But anger that doesn't get examined eventually turns into something that hurts you worse than it hurts the person you're angry at. Are you saying I shouldn't be mad at him? No. I'm saying your anger is valid. He failed you and your mother. That's a fact. But if you hold on to it so tight that you never let yourself see anything else, you'll miss the chance to have a father who's trying to do better. Ivy's hands clenched on the table. What if I don't want him to do better? What if I want him to hurt the way Mama hurt? The rawness of it stole Alira's breath. Then he will, she said quietly. Because he already does. Every time he looks at you and sees what he missed, every time you pull away from him, every time he realizes he can't undo the past, it destroys him. I see it in his face. Good. The word was harsh, but Ivy's eyes were filling with tears. Oh, sweetheart. Alira moved around the table and pulled the girl into her arms. You don't have to forgive him. Not today, maybe not ever. But don't let hating him become the only thing that defines your relationship. You deserve more than that. Ivy sobbed against her shoulder and Alira held her, thinking about all the ways people hurt each other and the impossible work of healing. They spent the day working side by side, reorganizing the root cellar as promised, then baking bread, then sitting by the fire while Alira taught Ivy a card game her own mother had taught her years ago. It was peaceful, quiet, the kind of day Alira would have never imagined having a month ago. Boone returned as the sun was setting, trudging through snow with 2 rabbits and a fox pelt slung over his shoulder. He looked exhausted but satisfied. Good haul, he said, hanging the animals in the smokehouse. Should have enough meat for another week. At dinner, Ivy was quieter than usual. She pushed food around her plate, clearly wrestling with something. Finally, she spoke. Can I ask you something? Boone looked up, wary. Of course. Why did Mama keep your picture by her bed? If you abandoned us, why didn't she throw it away? The question hit like a fist. Alira saw Boone's entire body tense. I don't know, he said, honestly. Maybe she hoped I'd come back. Maybe she wanted you to know what I looked like. Maybe she still loved you, Ivy interrupted, even though you didn't deserve it. No, Boone agreed, his voice rough. I didn't deserve it, but your mother had a bigger heart than most people. Bigger than mine, certainly. She told me once that loving someone doesn't mean they didn't hurt you. It just means the good parts mattered enough to remember. Ivy's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I didn't understand what she meant then. I'm still not sure I do. Boone set down his fork carefully, like he was afraid sudden movement might shatter the moment. Your mother was the best person I ever knew, he said. Smart and kind and strong enough to raise a daughter alone when she shouldn't have had to. Every good thing about me came from knowing her. Every bad thing came from walking away. Then why did you do it? Because I was broken and selfish and convinced myself it was noble. He met Ivy's eyes directly. There's no good answer, Ivy. I made the worst choice of my life, and 2 people I loved paid the price. I'd give anything to go back and do it differently, but I can't. So all I can do is be here now and hope that's enough. Ivy stared at him for a long moment. Then she stood and walked to her bedroom, closing the door behind her. Not slamming it, just closing it. Progress, maybe. Boone dropped his head into his hands. That went well, he said bitterly. Actually, it did, Alira said. She's asking questions instead of just being angry. That means she's starting to process. Doesn't feel like progress. Healing rarely does while it's happening. They cleaned up dinner in silence. Later, in the loft, Alira lay awake listening to the wind howl around the cabin. Winter was settling in hard now. Soon they'd be truly isolated, cut off from town by snow too deep for the wagon. The thought should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt almost safe. The next morning brought a surprise. Alira woke to find Boone and Ivy both already up, standing at the window watching something in the meadow. What is it? She asked, climbing down the ladder. Elk, Boone said softly. Whole herd came through. Alira moved to the window and caught her breath. At least 30 elk grazed in the snow-covered meadow, their breath steaming in the cold air. A massive bull stood watch at the edge of the herd, antlers like a crown. They're beautiful, Ivy whispered. They come through every few weeks, Boone said. The meadow grass is good even under snow. I leave them be mostly, only hunt if we're desperate. They watched in silence as the herd moved slowly across the valley. Ivy's face was pressed against the glass, completely absorbed. When the elk finally disappeared into the tree line, she turned to Boone. "Can you teach me to carve one? An elk, I mean, with antlers." It was the first time she'd directly asked him for anything. Boone's throat worked. "Yeah, I can teach you that." They spent the morning at the table, Boone guiding Ivy's small hands as she learned to work the knife properly. He was patient in a way Alira wouldn't have expected, never getting frustrated when she made mistakes, just showing her again how to read the grain of the wood. "Carving is about taking away everything that doesn't belong," he explained. "You're not making the elk. You're revealing the elk that's already hiding in the wood." "That's stupid," Ivy said, but there was no heat in it. "It's just a piece of wood." "Look closer." She did, tilting the wood in the light, and something shifted in her expression. She was starting to see what he meant. Alira left them to it and went to tend the chickens. The temperamental birds had finally accepted her presence, though they still gave her suspicious looks. She was collecting eggs when she heard voices from the cabin. Raised voices. She hurried back inside to find Ivy holding her hand, blood welling from a cut across her palm. "I told you to keep your fingers clear of the blade," Boone was saying, his voice tight with worry that came out as anger. "You have to pay attention or you'll hurt yourself." "I was paying attention," Ivy shot back. "The wood slipped. Because you weren't holding it right. I showed you 3 times. Maybe you're just bad at teaching." Boone's face went hard. "Fine. We're done for today." He stalked outside, the door slamming behind him. Ivy stood frozen, tears streaming down her face, from pain or frustration or both. Alira moved into crisis mode. She cleaned the cut, which was shallow but bleeding freely, wrapped it in clean cloth, made Ivy sit by the fire with hot tea sweetened with honey. "It was my fault," Ivy said miserably. "I wasn't holding it right. He showed me and I thought I knew better. Accidents happen when you're learning." "He was so mad." "He was scared," Alira corrected. "There's a difference. He saw you hurt and panicked because he cares about you." "He has a funny way of showing it." Alira sat beside her. "Can I tell you something about your father?" Ivy shrugged, which Alira took as permission. "The mine collapse that changed him. 17 men died. He survived by crawling through pitch-black tunnels with bodies all around him, not knowing if the ceiling would come down and bury him too. It took 3 days for rescuers to reach him. 3 days alone in the dark with dead men." Ivy had gone very still. "He came out different," Alira continued, "damaged in ways that don't show on the outside. And one of those ways is that he gets scared easily when people he cares about might be in danger. That fear comes out as anger because anger feels more controllable." "How do you know all this?" "He told me. Bits and pieces." Alira touched Ivy's bandaged hand gently. "He's trying, sweetheart. He doesn't know how to be a father yet. You're going to have to be patient with him while he learns, the same way he has to be patient with you." "I don't want to be patient. I'm tired of being patient." "I know. But that's what love requires sometimes. Patience when you don't want to give it." Ivy looked at her sharply. "I don't love him?" "Maybe not yet. But you could, if you let yourself." The girl pulled away, clutching her tea. "You don't understand. Actually, I understand better than you think. I've spent 6 years angry at myself for failing someone. That anger became familiar, comfortable. Letting it go meant facing the grief underneath, and that was terrifying." "What changed?" "I came here, met you, realized I could either keep punishing myself or I could try to do better." Alira met Ivy's eyes. "You get to make the same choice. Keep punishing your father for his mistakes or give him a chance to be better. Either way is valid. But one way might give you a family, the other guarantees you stay angry forever." Ivy was quiet for a long time. Finally, she stood. "I'm going to find him." "Ivy." But the girl was already pulling on her coat and heading outside. Alira watched through the window as Ivy trudged through snow toward the woodshed where Boone had disappeared. She couldn't hear what was said, but she saw Ivy's small form approach the massive silhouette of the man, saw her say something, saw Boone drop to his knees in the snow. And then, miracle of miracles, she saw Ivy step forward and let him wrap his arms around her. It lasted maybe 10 seconds before Ivy pulled back, but it was something. It was a start. They came back inside together, not touching but walking side by side. Boone's eyes were red. Ivy's bandaged hand was clutched against her chest. "We're going to try again tomorrow," Ivy announced. "The carving, but slower this time." "Slower," Boone agreed, his voice hoarse, "and I'll get you a safety glove." Should have done that from the start. That night, for the first time, Ivy didn't have a nightmare. Small victories. The days began to blur together in a rhythm that felt almost normal. Lessons in the morning, chores in the afternoon, quiet evenings by the fire. The snow kept falling, piling higher against the cabin walls until the world shrank to just their small valley. Alira found herself thinking less about her old life and more about this new one. The store in Redemption Ridge felt like something from another lifetime. That solitary woman who'd wanted nothing but to be left alone seemed like a stranger. She was changing. They all were. Boone started talking more, filling the silence with stories about the mountains and the animals that lived there. He taught Ivy how to read animal tracks in the snow, how to tell if a storm was coming by watching the birds, how to find north without a compass. Survival skills, he called them. But Alira saw it for what it was, a father desperate to share pieces of himself with his daughter. Ivy started calling him Boone instead of him, or that man, not father or papa, but it was closer than before. And late at night, when Alira and Boone lay in their separate spaces in the loft, they started talking. Not about anything important, just small exchanges about the day, about Ivy, about plans for tomorrow. But Alira found herself looking forward to those quiet conversations in the dark. One night, 6 weeks after Ivy's arrival, Boone spoke into the darkness. "Alira?" "I need to tell you something about why I really bought this building in town. The one I gave you." She was suddenly very awake. "All right. After the collapse, I had nightmares, bad ones. Woke up screaming most nights. Couldn't be around people because I'd panic if too many got too close. I came up here to disappear, but I kept having these dreams about Catherine, about her needing help, and me being too broken to give it." He paused, and Alira waited. "One night, I walked into town, middle of winter, half out of my mind. I was going to go to her building in Denver, see if she was okay. I got as far as your store before I realized how insane that was. Sat on your porch until dawn, trying to talk myself down." "I never knew," Alira said softly. "You were asleep. But when you opened the next morning, you saw me there and you didn't scream or call the marshal. You just asked if I needed coffee. Brought me a cup without waiting for an answer. Didn't ask questions, didn't judge, just offered kindness to a stranger who probably looked half feral." Alira remembered that morning vaguely. A rough-looking man on her porch, clearly in distress. She'd given him coffee and let him sit until he was ready to leave. "When the previous owner died and the widow needed to sell fast, I bought it," Boone continued. "Told myself it was an investment, but really, I wanted to make sure you'd always have a place, that you'd be safe, because you'd been kind when you didn't have to be. Boone, you asked me once why I chose you to ask for help. That was part of it. I knew you were good. Knew you'd do right by Ivy even if you never forgave me for my mistakes." Alira's chest felt tight. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because in 2 weeks, Judge Morrison comes to check on us, and I realized you might leave after. The agreement was 1 year, but if Morrison approves the placement, you could get your annulment and go back to town. I'd understand if you wanted to." "Is that what you want?" Silence. Then, "No. But what I want doesn't matter. You signed up to help a child, not to spend your life trapped in the mountains with a broken man." "You're not broken," Alira said fiercely. "You're healing. There's a difference." "Alira, I'm not leaving, Boone. Not after 2 weeks, not after 6 months. Not until Ivy is settled and safe and doesn't need me anymore. That was my promise to her, and I keep my promises." She heard him exhale shakily. "Thank you," he whispered. They didn't speak again that night, but something had shifted between them. Some wall had come down that neither had fully acknowledged was there. Judge Morrison arrived on a crisp December morning, his wagon struggling through snow that came up to the wheel hubs. He brought Marshal Davies with him, both men armed and clearly skeptical about what they'd find. Alira watched them approach from the cabin window, her stomach in knots. This was it. The moment that would determine everything. Boone stood beside her, his jaw set with tension. Ivy was in her room, having been told to stay there until called. Morrison knocked and Boone opened the door. "Judge, Marshal, welcome." The two men stepped inside, and Elira saw them take in the cabin with sharp, assessing eyes. The neat interior, the fire crackling warmly, the books on shelves, the smell of fresh bread. "Mrs. Mercer," Morrison said with a nod. It still felt strange being called that. "Judge Morrison, would you like coffee?" "That would be fine, thank you." They all sat at the table, Morrison and Davies on one side, Elira and Boone on the other, like a trial. Morrison pulled out official-looking papers. "I'm here to assess Ivy's living conditions and speak with her privately to ensure she's being properly cared for. I'll need to inspect the cabin, interview each of you separately, and spend time with the child alone." "Of course," Elira said. "Whatever you need to do." Morrison's eyes were sharp. "I'll be frank with you both. I had serious reservations about this arrangement. A marriage of convenience, a traumatized child, an isolated cabin with a man known for instability. I expected to find problems." Boone's hands clenched on the table. "But," Morrison continued, "I'm also fair, so I'll make my assessment based on what I see today, not on my assumptions. Understood?" They both nodded. Morrison spent the next hour inspecting everything. The bedroom Ivy slept in with its carved animals and well-stocked bookshelf, the root cellar full of preserved food, the barn with healthy animals, the smokehouse with curing meat. He asked questions. How often did Ivy eat? What were her lessons like? Did she seem happy? Was there any evidence of mistreatment? Elira answered honestly. Ivy ate 3 meals a day. Her lessons covered reading, arithmetic, history, and nature study. She seemed to be adjusting as well as could be expected given her grief. There was no mistreatment, just 2 adults trying their best with a hurting child. Finally, Morrison asked to speak with Ivy alone. Elira went to get her. The girl had been reading on her bed, the fairy tale book open beside her. "The judge wants to talk to you," Elira said gently. "Remember, be honest. Tell him exactly how you feel. Don't worry about protecting us." Ivy nodded, her face pale, but determined. They waited outside in the cold while Morrison spoke with Ivy. 15 minutes felt like hours. Davies stood guard, clearly ready to intervene if needed. Boone paced like a caged animal. "Stop," Elira said. "You're making yourself crazy. If he takes her, he won't. Ivy will tell him the truth. That's all we can ask for." But her own heart was hammering. Finally, the cabin door opened. Morrison stepped out, Ivy behind him. The judge's face was unreadable. "Mr. and Mrs. Mercer," he said formally, "I've completed my assessment." This was it. Morrison looked at Boone directly. "When you first came to me with this arrangement, I thought you were either desperate or delusional, probably both. I didn't think a marriage thrown together in a day could provide real stability for a child." Boone's jaw clenched. "I was wrong." The words hung in the cold air. "That child in there," Morrison continued, "is grieving her mother. That's not going to change anytime soon, but she's also fed, warm, educated, and clearly cared for. She told me about her lessons with Mrs. Mercer, about learning to carve with you, about the elk in the meadow, and the chickens that try to peck her when she collects eggs." He paused, looking between them. "She also told me you're all still learning how to be a family, that it's awkward sometimes and hard, that she's still angry about the past." Morrison's expression softened slightly. "But when I asked if she felt safe here, she said yes. When I asked if she wanted to stay, she said yes. And when I asked if she thought you were trying your best, she said yes." Elira felt tears prick her eyes. "So I'm approving this placement," Morrison said. "Full custody to Boone Mercer with Elira Mercer as legal guardian in the event of his death or incapacity. I'll return in 6 months for another check, but barring any significant problems, I don't anticipate removing Ivy from your care." Boone made a sound that might have been a sob or a laugh or both. "Thank you," Elira managed. "Thank you so much." Morrison handed them the official papers. "Don't make me regret this. The child has been through enough." "We won't," Boone said hoarsely. "I swear we won't." Morrison and Davies left, their wagon disappearing down the mountain road. Elira, Boone, and Ivy stood in the yard watching them go. When the wagon was out of sight, Ivy turned to them. "I told him the truth," she said, "that I'm still sad about Mama, that I'm still mad at you sometimes." She looked at Boone. "But also that you're trying, that you both are, and that maybe..." Maybe that's enough for now. Boone dropped to his knees in the snow, eye level with his daughter. I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that, he said. I promise. Ivy studied him for a long moment. Then she reached out and touched his scarred hand. Mama used to say promises are easy to make but hard to keep. So don't promise. Just do it. All right, Boone agreed. I'll do it. Something passed between them then. Not forgiveness, maybe. Not yet. But understanding. Acceptance that they were both doing their best. It was enough. That night, Ivy asked if she could sleep in the loft between Elira and Boone. I don't want to be alone tonight, she said quietly. Is that okay? They made her a bed between their two spaces, and she curled up with her wooden deer clutched against her chest. Within minutes, her breathing had evened into sleep. Elira lay in the darkness, acutely aware of Boone on the other side of the sleeping child, of the family they were becoming against all odds. Elira? Boone's voice was barely a whisper. Yeah. Thank you for staying, for not leaving when you had the chance. Where else would I go? She whispered back. This is home now. And somewhere between leaving Redemption Ridge and this moment, it had become true. This cabin in the mountains, with a grieving child and a broken man trying to heal, had become home. Winter deepened its grip on the mountains, and with it came a different kind of silence. Not the lonely silence Elira had known in her room above the store, but something fuller. The quiet of three people learning to exist in the same space without constant friction. Ivy slept in her own room again after that night in the loft, but she left the door open. Sometimes Elira would wake to find the girl standing at the top of the ladder, checking to make sure they were both still there before padding back to bed. Trust slowly building. Christmas approached, though none of them mentioned it directly. The holiday felt complicated. Ivy's first without her mother, a reminder of all the Christmases Boone had missed, a marker of how strange their lives had become. But one morning, Elira woke to find Boone had dragged a small pine tree into the cabin and was attempting to stand it upright in a bucket of rocks. What are you doing? She asked, climbing down the ladder. He looked almost embarrassed. Thought Ivy might like it. Catherine used to write about how much she loved decorating for Christmas. Seemed like we should try. The tree was crooked and dropping needles everywhere. It was also the most thoughtful thing Elira had seen him do. We'll need decorations, she said. I thought maybe we could make them. String popcorn or something. I don't really know how this works. Ivy emerged from her bedroom, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She stopped when she saw the tree. Mama and I always had a tree, she said quietly. Even when we couldn't afford much else. She'd make decorations from scraps of fabric and buttons. I don't have fabric scraps, Boone said, but I could carve ornaments if you'd help. Ivy moved closer to the tree, touched one of the branches gently. She'd hang them where the light could catch them, said it was like hanging pieces of magic. Her voice broke on the last word. Elira stepped forward, but Ivy held up a hand. I'm okay, I miss her. Of course you do, Elira said. You always will. But that doesn't mean we can't make new traditions too. We can honor what you had with your mother and still create something here. Ivy looked between them, her young face grave with the weight of decisions no child should have to make. Then she nodded. Okay, but we do it right. Mama had rules about Christmas trees. So they spent the next 3 days transforming the crooked pine into something Catherine Walsh would have recognized. Boone carved delicate ornaments, stars and snowflakes and tiny birds with spread wings. Ivy directed their placement with the authority of someone who'd learned from a master. Elira strung popcorn and cranberries, her fingers cramping from the work, but her heart lighter than it had been in years. On Christmas Eve, they sat by the fireplace with the tree glowing in the lamplight, and Ivy told them about Christmases past, her mother's apple cake. The year they couldn't afford presents, so Catherine had drawn a portrait of Ivy instead, capturing her daughter's gap-toothed smile in careful pencil strokes. I still have it, Ivy said. In my bag. It's one of the only pictures of me she made. Can I see it? Boone asked carefully. Ivy hesitated, then retrieved the drawing from her room. She handed it to her father with visible reluctance, as if afraid he'd damaged this precious thing. Boone studied the portrait with an expression that made Elira's throat tight. His thumb traced the edge of the paper. Catherine's hand had drawn these lines, had captured their daughter in this moment. She was talented, he said hoarsely. I'd forgotten how good she was at drawing. She drew you once, Ivy said. Showed it to me before she got really sick. Said she wanted me to know what you looked like when you smiled. Boone's hands trembled. What happened to it? She made me burn it. Ivy's voice was matter of fact, but Elira heard the pain underneath. Said she didn't want to die looking at the face of someone who'd left her, but she cried when we did it. I remember that. The confession hung in the air like smoke. Boone carefully handed the portrait back to Ivy. I'm sorry, he said, for all of it, for making her cry, for not being there, for… I know, Ivy interrupted. You've said sorry a lot. Mama used to say sorry doesn't fix things, only actions do. She was right. They sat in silence, watching the fire. Then Ivy spoke again, softer. She also said everyone deserves a chance to be better. The people aren't defined by their worst mistakes if they work hard enough to change. Boone looked at his daughter with naked hope. Did she say that about me? Near the end, when the fever was bad and she thought I couldn't hear, she told the doctor she hoped you'd found peace, that she forgave you. A sound escaped Boone that was half sob, half breath. He stood abruptly and walked outside, the cold rushing in before the door slammed shut. Ivy flinched. Should I not have told him? She asked Elira. No, sweetheart. He needed to hear it. Sometimes the kindest truths are the ones that hurt most. Why did he leave? Because he's crying and he doesn't want you to see. Men sometimes think they have to be strong all the time, even when being strong means breaking alone. Ivy absorbed this, then stood with determination. That's stupid. Mama cried in front of me all the time. It didn't make her weak. She pulled on her coat and followed Boone outside before Elira could stop her. Through the window, Elira watched the small figure approach the large one. Boone was sitting on the porch steps, shoulders shaking. Ivy sat beside him without a word. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Ivy leaned against her father's side. Just slightly, just enough. And Boone's arm came around her shoulders, tentative and gentle, like he was holding something infinitely precious that might shatter if he gripped too tight. They sat like that until the cold drove them back inside, and when they returned, neither mentioned what had passed between them. But something had shifted. Some invisible barrier had cracked. Christmas morning brought fresh snow and a quiet joy that felt fragile but real. They had no grand presents. Elira had knitted Ivy a scarf in secret, Boone had carved her a larger animal to add to her collection, and Ivy had drawn portraits of them both with careful, serious concentration. Elira's portrait showed her by the window with a book, lamplight catching in her hair. It was surprisingly good for a 7-year-old. Boone showed him by the fire, carving, his face softer than it ever looked in real life. This is how I see you, Ivy explained when Boone stared at his portrait in wonder. When you're working and you think no one's watching, you look less sad. I am less sad, Boone said, because you're here. It was the most direct declaration of love he'd given her, and Ivy's eyes went wide. She didn't say anything back, but she carefully set the portraits on the shelf beside her mother's drawing of her, placing all three together like a family. The day passed quietly. They ate too much, played cards, read by the fire. It wasn't the Christmas either Elira or Boone had imagined having, but it was good. It was enough. That night, after Ivy had gone to bed, Elira and Boone sat in the loft in their separate spaces with the blanket partition between them. Thank you for the tree, Elira said into the darkness, for trying to make it special for her. I didn't do much. You and Ivy did all the real work. You brought the tree home. That was the important part. Silence settled, comfortable now instead of awkward. Then Boone spoke. Can I ask you something? Of course. The child you mentioned, Clara, what happened to her family after? Elira closed her eyes against the memories. Her father was arrested. Apparently neighbors had called authorities before, but nothing had been done. After Clara died, they finally investigated properly. He went to prison. And you blamed yourself. I saw the signs. I suspected. But I waited for more proof instead of acting, and she died waiting for someone to save her. You were one person trying to do the right thing in an impossible situation, Boone said gently. You can't carry all that weight alone. says the man who's been carrying guilt for 7 years. That's different. I made a choice I knew was wrong. You were trying to be careful, to do things properly. There's a difference between a mistake and a betrayal. Alira rolled onto her side, facing the blanket partition as if she could see through it to where Boone lay. Is there? Because it feels the same from inside the guilt. Maybe, but I think the fact that it still hurts means we're not broken beyond repair. If we didn't care, we wouldn't carry it. That's surprisingly philosophical for a mountain man. She heard him huff something that might have been a laugh. I've had a lot of time alone to think. Too much time, probably. Made me strange. You're not strange. You're just... She searched for the right word. Careful. Deliberate. Like you're afraid if you move too fast, you'll break something. Most things I touch do break. Not Ivy. Not me. The silence that followed was different, charged with something neither of them seemed ready to name. Alira, Boone said finally, his voice rough. When the year is up and the annulment comes, you don't have to go. If you wanted to stay, as part of this family, Ivy needs you, and I... He trailed off, but the unfinished sentence hung between them. What? Alira prompted. You what? I'm better with you here. Calmer. Like I can breathe properly for the first time since the collapse. You make me want to be the person I was before everything went wrong. Alira's heart was hammering. Boone, you don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know that you're not just helping with Ivy. You're helping me too. She didn't know how to respond to that. Didn't know how to articulate the complicated tangle of feelings she'd been carefully not examining. So she said the only true thing she could. I'm not planning to leave. She heard his exhale, shaky with relief. They didn't speak again that night, but Alira lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and wondering when this arrangement had stopped feeling temporary and started feeling like something she wanted to last. Winter continued its relentless march. The snow piled higher, the temperatures dropped lower, and the three of them settled into patterns that felt increasingly permanent. Ivy's nightmares came less frequently. She laughed more easily. Started calling Boone Papa when she thought Alira wasn't listening, though she still used Boone to his face. Small steps, progress measured in inches rather than miles, but not everything was smooth. One afternoon in late January, Ivy and Boone had their worst fight yet. It started over something small. Ivy had wanted to explore farther into the forest alone, and Boone had refused permission. I'm not a baby, Ivy said, her voice rising. I can take care of myself. The forest is dangerous in winter. You could get lost, fall through ice, run into a bear. You go out alone all the time. I'm an adult who knows these mountains. You're 7 years old. Almost 8, Ivy shot back. And Mama let me do things by myself. She trusted me. The moment the words left her mouth, Alira saw Ivy realize her mistake. But it was too late. Boone's face went hard. Your mother isn't here. I am. And while you're in my care, you follow my rules. I didn't ask to be in your care. I didn't ask to be here at all. Ivy, Alira said, trying to intervene. But the girl was crying now, years of grief and anger spilling out unchecked. I want my mother. I want to go home. I hate it here. I hate this cabin and these stupid mountains, and I hate you for not being there when she needed you. Boone absorbed each word like a physical blow. I know, he said quietly. I know you do. I wish you died in that mine instead of those other men. At least then Mama wouldn't have spent her whole life hoping you'd come back. The silence that followed was absolute. Ivy's face crumpled. I didn't mean... But Boone had already turned and walked out the door, moving like a man in shock. Ivy collapsed onto the floor, sobbing. I didn't mean it. I didn't mean it. Alira gathered her up, held her while she cried herself sick. I know, baby. I know you didn't. I'm a terrible person. No, you're a grieving child who said something cruel because you're hurt. That's different. But I hurt him? Yes, and you'll have to apologize and deal with the consequences. But Ivy, listen to me. Alira tilted the girl's face up. Your father knows you're angry. He knows you're in pain. One cruel thing said in anger isn't going to make him stop loving you. How do you know? Because he spent 7 years punishing himself for his mistakes. He understands guilt. He'll forgive you because he knows what it's like to need forgiveness. Ivy hiccuped. Where did he go? Probably somewhere to be alone while he processes. Give him time. But when Boone hadn't returned by nightfall, Elira started to worry. She bundled Ivy into warm clothes and they went searching, following his tracks in the snow. They found him at the edge of the cliff behind the cabin, sitting on a boulder and staring out at the frozen valley below. "Papa," Ivy called out, her voice small. He turned, and Elira saw his face was wet with tears. Ivy ran to him, nearly slipping on ice in her haste. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean what I said. I was just mad. And I wanted to hurt you because I hurt, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry." Boone caught her in his arms, holding her tight. "I know. It's okay." "It's not okay. I said terrible things." "You said how you felt. You're allowed to be angry at me, Ivy. I deserve it." "But I don't want you to die," Ivy sobbed against his chest. "I don't want you to go away. I already lost Mama. I can't lose you too." Boone's face crumpled. He held his daughter and cried with her, both of them releasing grief they'd been holding too carefully. Elira stood back, giving them space, her own eyes wet. Eventually, the tears subsided. Boone carried Ivy back to the cabin. She was getting too big for it, really, but she wrapped herself around him like a much younger child seeking comfort. They sat by the fire, Ivy curled in Boone's lap in a way she'd never allowed before. "Tell me about the mine," she said quietly. "I want to understand why it scared you so much." Boone looked at Elira over Ivy's head, clearly asking permission. She nodded. So he told the story. Not sparing himself, but not making it more dramatic than it was. He described the darkness, the fear, the sounds of men dying around him. The 3 days trapped underground with no way to know if rescue would come. "When they finally pulled me out," he said, "I couldn't be in enclosed spaces anymore. Couldn't sleep without lamps burning. Couldn't breathe if I felt trapped. Your mother tried to help, but I was drowning in panic, and I convinced myself she'd be better off without me." "That was stupid," Ivy said, but gently. "Very stupid, but fear makes people do stupid things. Are you still scared?" "Sometimes. Less than before. Having you here helps. Gives me something to focus on besides the memories." Ivy was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm scared too. That you'll leave again. Or that something will happen to you or Elira and I'll be alone." "I can't promise nothing will happen," Boone said honestly. "Life is unpredictable and dangerous, but I can promise I'm not leaving by choice. Not ever again." "What about Elira?" Ivy looked at her. "Are you going to leave when the year is up?" Elira met Boone's eyes across the firelight. "No, I'm staying." "Promise?" "I promise." Ivy relaxed against her father's chest, finally allowing herself to trust. "Okay, then we're a family." "Yeah," Boone said, his voice thick. "We're a family." That night, Ivy insisted on sleeping in the loft again, between them. And this time when she fell asleep, Elira's hand somehow found Boone's across the small space between their bedrolls. They held hands in the darkness, neither speaking, both understanding that something fundamental had changed. They were no longer three broken people tied together by necessity. They were choosing each other. February brought a different challenge. Ivy woke one morning with a fever that spiked high enough to make her delirious. Elira tried every remedy she knew, cool cloths, willow bark tea, keeping her hydrated, but the fever wouldn't break. By the second day, she was terrified. "We need to get her to a doctor," she told Boone. He looked out at the snow. Fresh powder had fallen the night before, making the road impassable. "We'd never make it to town. Not in this. The wagon would get stuck before we made it a mile." "Then what do we do?" "There's a trapper named Carson who lives about 3 miles north. He's got medical training from his army days. If I leave now, I can bring him back by nightfall." "That's too long. What if... What choice do we have?" Boone's face was drawn with fear, but his voice was steady. "I'll move as fast as I can. Keep her cool. Keep her drinking. I'll be back." He left within minutes, and Elira was alone with a feverish child in her own rising panic. Clara had died because Elira hadn't acted fast enough. She couldn't let that happen again. She sat by Ivy's bed, cooling her burning skin, coaxing water between her cracked lips, and praying to anyone who might be listening that Boone would make it back in time. Ivy drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes calling for her mother, sometimes mumbling words that made no sense. Don't leave me, she whispered once. Please don't leave me alone. Never, Alira promised. I'm right here. The hours crawled past. Alira's back ached from sitting. Her eyes burned with exhaustion and fear. But she didn't move from Ivy's side. Just when she thought she might break from the tension, she heard voices outside. The door burst open and Boone entered with a grizzled old man carrying a medical bag. This is Carson, Boone said, breathing hard from the run. Best field medic in 3 territories. Carson examined Ivy quickly, efficiently. He listened to her breathing, checked her pulse, looked at her throat. Influenza, he said finally. Bad strain, but she's young and strong. The fever needs to break soon, though, or we'll have problems. He mixed something in a cup, herbs Alira didn't recognize, and got it down Ivy's throat despite her protests. Now we wait, Carson said. Next few hours will tell us which way this goes. So they waited. Boone paced. Alira held Ivy's hand. Carson dozed in a chair, apparently able to sleep anywhere. Near midnight, Ivy's fever finally broke. She opened her eyes, clear for the first time in 2 days, and looked at the 3 adults surrounding her bed. Why does everyone look so worried? She asked, her voice hoarse. Alira laughed, tears streaming down her face. Because you scared us half to death, you impossible child. Sorry, Ivy mumbled. Didn't mean to. She fell back into sleep, but it was real sleep now, not fever-induced delirium. Carson checked her once more and nodded with satisfaction. She'll be weak for a few days, but she'll recover. Keep her hydrated and rested. Boone clasped the old man's hand. Thank you. I owe you. You helped me dig out from that avalanche 2 winters back. We're even. Carson headed for the door, then paused. You've got a good family here, Mercer. Don't take it for granted. After he left, Alira and Boone sat in the main room, too exhausted to move. I thought we were going to lose her, Boone said quietly. For a few hours there, I thought history was repeating and I'd lose another person I loved because I wasn't good enough to save them. But she's okay. She's going to be fine. This time. But what about next time? What if, Boone? Alira reached over and took his hand. You can't control everything. You can't prevent every danger. All you can do is be here and try your best. That's enough. Is it? It was enough today. He looked down at their joined hands, then up at her face. When did you become the wise one? Probably around the same time you became the devoted father. We're both learning as we go. He smiled, tired but genuine. Yeah, I guess we are. They sat in silence, hands still clasped, until exhaustion finally drove them to their respective beds. But something had solidified between them during those terrifying hours. They weren't just co-parents anymore. They were partners. People who relied on each other, trusted each other, chose each other. And somewhere in the process of saving a child, they'd started saving themselves. Spring came late to the mountains that year, arriving in hesitant increments rather than a sudden thaw. First, the icicles began to drip. Then patches of brown earth emerged from beneath the snow, and finally the stream behind the cabin ran free and loud with meltwater. Ivy recovered from her illness slowly, spending weeks wrapped in blankets by the fire before her strength returned fully. During those long recovery days, something shifted in the cabin's atmosphere. The careful politeness they'd all maintained began to fray at the edges, revealing something more genuine underneath. Real family, with all its complications. One morning in early March, Alira woke to find Boone already gone, and Ivy sitting at the table writing something with intense concentration. What are you working on? Alira asked, pouring coffee from the pot Boone had left warming by the fire. Ivy covered the paper with her hand. Nothing, just something. All right. Alira had learned when to push and when to let things be. Hungry? Not really. My stomach still feels weird. You need to eat anyway. Your body's still healing. Ivy made a face but didn't argue. They'd gotten good at these small negotiations, the give and take that made daily life work. While Alira cooked eggs, she watched Ivy from the corner of her eye. The girl had grown since arriving, not just physically, though she'd shot up at least an inch, but in other ways too. She carried herself differently now, less like someone bracing for the next blow, more like someone who'd found solid ground. After breakfast, Ivy finally revealed what she'd been writing. It's a letter, she said, sliding the paper across the table. To Mama. Carson said sometimes it helps to write to people who've died, to say things you didn't get to say. Elira's throat tightened. Do you want me to read it? I already sealed it. I'm going to bury it by the big pine tree, the one where Papa showed me the owl's nest. She paused. Is that weird? No, sweetheart. It's not weird at all. They walked to the tree together, Ivy carrying her letter in a small wooden box Boone had carved. She placed the letter inside, closed the lid carefully, and dug a hole in the half-frozen earth with her bare hands. I told her about you and Papa, Ivy said, patting dirt over the buried box. Told her I was still mad at him sometimes, but that he's trying. Told her you take good care of me, that I'm learning to read animal tracks and carve wood, and that the mountains are quiet, but in a good way. I'm sure she'd be happy to know you're safe. Ivy stood, brushing dirt from her hands. I told her one more thing, too. What's that? That I think maybe it's okay to love new people even when you still miss the old ones. That maybe having a family here doesn't mean I'm forgetting her. She looked up at Elira with those two old eyes. Do you think that's true? Elira knelt in the mud and snow, eye level with this remarkable child. I think your mother would want you to be happy. I think she'd be grateful you found people who love you, and I think she'd be incredibly proud of how brave you've been. I don't feel brave. Bravery isn't about not being scared. It's about being terrified and doing the hard thing anyway. You've done that every single day since you got here. Ivy thought about this, then nodded slowly. Can I ask you something? Always. When the year's up and you don't have to be married to Papa anymore, are you really going to stay? Or were you just saying that to make me feel better? Elira had known this question was coming eventually. She'd been asking herself the same thing for weeks now, examining her feelings like they were some kind of puzzle she could solve through logic alone. But the truth was simpler and more complicated than logic. I'm staying, she said. Not because I have to. Because I want to. Do you love him? The bluntness of childhood, cutting straight to the heart of things. Elira stopped, searching for honest words. I care about him deeply. I respect him. I trust him with you, which is the highest trust I can give. Whether that's love or something that could become love, I don't know yet. But I know I want to find out. Ivy absorbed this with the seriousness of a judge weighing evidence. He looks at you funny sometimes, when you're not watching, like you're something he can't quite believe is real. Does that bother you? No. Mama used to say everyone deserves someone who looks at them like they hung the moon. I think maybe Papa looks at you like that. Elira's heart did something complicated in her chest. We should get back. You're supposed to be resting, not having philosophical discussions in the cold. I'm not tired of resting. I'm tired of being sick. One more week of taking it easy, Carson's orders. Ivy grumbled, but allowed herself to be led back to the cabin. As they approached, they could hear the sound of chopping wood, Boone working through his own thoughts the way he always did, with physical labor. He looked up when they emerged from the tree line, his eyes immediately finding Ivy and doing a quick assessment, checking that she was upright, breathing, intact. You're supposed to be resting, he called. That's what Elira said. Then why aren't you listening? Because I'm not made of glass. I'm not going to break if I walk around. Boone set down the axe and crossed to them. No, but you're recovering from a serious illness, and I'd rather you take a few extra days to heal than push too hard and relapse. You sound like an old woman. I sound like someone who spent 2 days thinking he might lose you. So yes, I'm being overprotective. Deal with it. They stared at each other, a battle of wills that had become familiar. Then Ivy smiled, small but genuine. Okay, I'll rest, but only because you asked nice. I didn't ask nice. I basically ordered you. I'm choosing to interpret it as asking nice. She went inside, leaving Boone shaking his head. She's going to be impossible when she's older, he said. She's already impossible, Elira replied. She gets it from you. Me? I'm the most reasonable person here. You literally threatened to fight a bear last week because you thought it was getting too close to the cabin. It was getting too close, and I didn't threaten to fight it. I just encouraged it to leave by yelling and waving an axe. The axe was for emphasis. Elira laughed, and the sound startled her. When had laughter become easy again? When had this isolated mountain cabin started feeling less like exile and more like home? Boone was watching her with that expression Ivy had mentioned, like she was something unexpected and precious. "What?" she asked. "Nothing. Just, you look happy." "I am happy. That's strange, isn't it? A few months ago, I would have said happiness wasn't possible for me anymore. But here I am." "Here you are," Boone echoed. He took a step closer, then seemed to think better of it and stopped. "Elira, I need to tell you something." Her pulse quickened. "All right. When we made this arrangement, I thought it was just about Ivy, about giving her a home and keeping custody. And it was, at first. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being just about her." "Boone? Let me finish, please." He looked down at his hands, scarred and calloused from years of hard living. "I'm not good with words. Never have been. But I need you to know that you've become essential to me. Not just as Ivy's caretaker or as part of this arrangement, as yourself. Elira Voss, the woman who gave up her entire life to help strangers, who reads stories with different voices for different characters, who puts flowers on the table even though they'll die in a few days because she says beauty matters even when it's temporary." Elira's eyes were burning. "I know the agreement was for 1 year," Boone continued. "I know you said you'd stay, but I want to make sure you understand what you're staying for. Not just Ivy, not just this cabin. Me too. All of me, including the broken parts that might never fully heal." "I know what I'm staying for," Elira said quietly. "I'm not walking into this blind." "And that's enough? A life up here with a damaged mountain man and his daughter?" She stepped forward and took his hand. His palm was warm, rough against her skin. "Boone Mercer, I spent 6 years punishing myself for failing a child I couldn't save. I lived in a room above a store and convinced myself that solitude was the same as safety, that if I never let anyone close, I could never fail them." She squeezed his hand. "But being here with you and Ivy has taught me something important. Isolation isn't protection. It's just another kind of death. You're both damaged, so am I. But we're healing each other. That's enough. That's more than enough." Boone's free hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "I don't deserve you." "That's not for you to decide. I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you, both of you." He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle and careful and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, Boone rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he whispered. "I didn't plan to. Didn't think I was capable of it anymore, but I do." "I love you too," Elira replied, and realized it was true. Had been true for longer than she'd admitted to herself. From the cabin window, they heard a distinct sound of celebration. "Ivy," Boone called without turning around. "Stop spying." "I'm not spying. I'm observing. There's a difference. Get back to resting." "I will after I finish celebrating that you two finally figured out what everyone else already knew." Boone sighed, but he was smiling. "That child is going to be the death of me." "Probably," Elira agreed. "But what a way to go." They walked back to the cabin hand in hand, and when they entered, Ivy was sitting innocently by the fire with a book. "I have no idea what you're talking about," she said without looking up. "I've been reading this entire time." "Your book is upside down," Elira pointed out. Ivy glanced down, righted the book, and returned to studied innocence. That night, after Ivy had gone to bed, Elira and Boone sat on the porch watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The air was still cold, but spring was there underneath it, waiting. "Judge Morrison is coming next week," Boone said. 6-month check-in. "I know. Everything's different now than it was at Christmas. He'll see that." "Is that a problem?" Boone considered. "No, I think he'll approve. This is what he wanted. A real family, not just a legal arrangement." "We are a real family," Elira said. "Strange and unconventional, but real." "Yeah, we are." They sat in comfortable silence until the cold drove them inside. Judge Morrison arrived the following Tuesday with Marshal Davies in tow. This time there was no suspicion in their faces, just professional assessment. Morrison interviewed them separately again, then spent an hour alone with Ivy. When he emerged, his expression was thoughtful. "That child has been through more than most adults endure in a lifetime," he said. "But she's thriving. Her reading has advanced significantly. She's healthy, well-adjusted considering her losses, and clearly attached to both of you. So you're approving continued custody? Boone asked. I am. Furthermore, I'm closing the case. I don't need to return in 6 months. This placement is permanent. Relief washed through Elira like a wave. However, Morrison continued, pulling out additional papers, there's the matter of your marriage. Here it was, the moment they'd been avoiding. The original agreement was for 1 year, Morrison said, after which Mrs. Mercer could file for annulment and return to her previous life. That year will be complete in approximately 4 months. We're aware, Elira said carefully. Morrison studied them both. I'm also aware that circumstances have changed. The question is whether you wish to formalize those changes legally. Boone and Elira exchanged glances. What are you suggesting? Boone asked. That you recommit to this marriage, not as an arrangement, but as a genuine partnership. I can file the paperwork to convert this from what is essentially a custodial agreement to a standard marriage. It would eliminate any future questions about the validity of your union. We'd like that, Elira said before she could second-guess herself. Yes. Boone's hand found hers under the table. Yes. Morrison produced the documents and they signed them there, making official what their hearts had already decided. After Morrison and Davies left, Ivy came out from her room where she'd been pretending not to listen. So you're really staying, she said to Elira. Forever. Forever. And you and Papa are really married, not pretend married. Really married, Ivy nodded seriously. Then she launched herself at both of them, wrapping her arms around them in a fierce hug. Good, because you're both stuck with me too. That night was the first time Elira and Boone shared the bedroom. Ivy insisted on it, saying she was too old to need them sleeping nearby anyway, though Elira suspected she just wanted them to have privacy. Lying in the dark beside Boone felt different than lying separated by a blanket partition. More intimate, more permanent. Nervous? Boone asked. A little. You? Terrified, but in a good way. They lay holding hands, and eventually sleep came. The months that followed established a new rhythm. Boone taught Ivy more advanced survival skills, how to track animals, how to fish, how to read weather patterns. Elira expanded her lessons to include more complex mathematics and introduced Ivy to literature beyond fairy tales. They made trips to Redemption Ridge together now, the three of them a visible family. The townspeople adjusted to the reality of it, their gossip fading from scandal to simple acceptance. Mrs. Henderson cornered Elira at the general store one afternoon. I was wrong about you, the older woman said bluntly. About him. I thought you were making a terrible mistake. But I saw you all at the church social last week. That man looks at you like you're the sun itself, and that little girl adores you both. We're figuring it out as we go, Elira said. Isn't that what all families do? Summer arrived in full force, transforming the valley into something lush and green. Ivy celebrated her 8th birthday with a cake Elira baked and presents Boone had been carving for months. An entire wooden menagerie. On a warm evening in August, almost a year after Ivy's arrival, the three of them sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the meadow. Tell me again about the day you got married, Ivy said. It had become one of her favorite stories. Which part? Boone asked. The part where you asked Elira even though you'd never talked to her before. That's so weird. It was desperate, Elira corrected, and terrifying. But you said yes anyway. I did. Why? Ivy asked, though she'd asked this before and heard the answer. Some stories needed retelling. Because a little girl needed a home, Elira said, and because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say yes to something terrifying. Do you regret it? Ivy asked Boone. Not for a single second, even when you're being impossible. I'm never impossible. I'm delightfully challenging. That's what impossible people always say. Ivy laughed and leaned against Elira's shoulder. I'm glad Mama's letters told you about me, even if you never read them when you should have. Boone's expression went somber. Me too, little bit. Me too. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and stars emerged. An owl called from the trees. The stream murmured its endless song. The mountains stood eternal around them. Inside the cabin, 3 lives intertwined in ways none of them could have predicted. A damaged man learning to be whole again. A grieving child discovering that love could multiply instead of replace. A woman who'd fled her failures, finding redemption in an unexpected family. They weren't perfect. Ivy still had nightmares sometimes. Boone still panicked in enclosed spaces. Alira still woke some mornings thinking about Clara and wondering if she'd truly earned forgiveness. But they had each other, and they were learning that healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about building something strong enough to carry its weight. As autumn approached again, marking a full year since Ivy's arrival, they planted a garden together. Vegetables for practical purposes, but also flowers because Alara insisted beauty mattered. Why plant them if they're just going to die when winter comes? Ivy asked, echoing Boone's own question. Because they're beautiful now, Elira explained. Because 6 months of beauty is better than no beauty at all. Because we plant them knowing they won't last forever, but we plant them anyway. Ivy thought about this, her hands deep in rich soil. Is that what you did with us? Planted something beautiful even though you didn't know if it would last? Elira met Boone's eyes across the garden plot. Yes, but this didn't die with the season. This kept growing. Will it keep growing? Ivy asked. Forever? Nothing is forever, Boone said. But we can tend it, water it, give it what it needs to thrive. That's what family is, choosing to nurture something every single day. They worked until the garden was planted, their hands dirty and their backs aching and their hearts full. That night, after Ivy had gone to sleep, Elira and Boone lay in bed talking about the future. About maybe adding onto the cabin to give Ivy more space as she grew. About teaching her to handle a rifle properly. About whether they should get a dog. Normal things. Future things. The kind of plans people make when they believe in tomorrow. Thank you, Boone said into the darkness. For what? For giving me a second chance. For seeing past what I'd done to what I was trying to become. For loving my daughter when you didn't have to. Our daughter, Elira corrected. She's ours now. Our daughter, Boone agreed, and she could hear the smile in his voice. They fell asleep holding each other, and for the first time in longer than either could remember, neither had nightmares. In the years that followed, they would face challenges, harsh winters and illness and the normal struggles of raising a strong-willed child. There would be arguments and tears and moments of doubt, but there would also be laughter. Quiet mornings watching sunrise paint the mountains gold. Evenings by the fire with Ivy reading aloud while Boone carved and Elira mended. Small triumphs and large joys, and the steady accumulation of moments that make a life. They would learn that family isn't defined by blood or tradition or meeting someone's idea of normal. It's defined by choice, by showing up every day and doing the hard work of loving imperfect people in an imperfect world. Ivy would grow into a remarkable young woman, stubborn and brilliant and kind in the way of people who've known real pain and chosen compassion anyway. She would carry her mother's memory forward while building her own life, and she would always know that she'd been worth the risk of two broken people learning to be whole. Boone would never fully heal from the mind collapse. The scars ran too deep, but he would learn to live with them instead of being defined by them. He would become the father he should have been from the start. Patient and present and willing to admit when he was wrong. And he would love Elira with the fierce devotion of someone who'd been given a gift he never expected to receive. Elira would carry Clara's memory too, but it would transform from a weight into a reminder. That hesitation costs lives. That action, even imperfect action, is better than paralysis. That we honor the dead by fighting for the living. She would become the mother she'd always hoped to be and the wife she'd never expected to become. And she would learn that redemption isn't about erasing mistakes. It's about making different choices every day until those choices become who you are. Years later, when Ivy was grown and making her own way in the world, she would return to the cabin with her own family. She would show her children the wooden animals her father had carved, the flowers her mother planted every spring despite knowing they wouldn't last, the mountain valley that had taught her what home really meant. And she would tell them the story of how three broken people found each other and built something beautiful from the pieces, because that's what families do. They take the fragments of their damaged selves and fit them together until the cracks become part of the pattern, until what was broken becomes strong enough to hold the weight of love. The cabin still stands in that mountain valley, weathering storms and seasons. Smoke still rises from its chimney on cold nights. And if you listen carefully on quiet evenings, you might hear the echo of laughter that once filled those rooms. The laughter of people who learned that the bravest thing you can do is let yourself be loved. The laughter of a family that chose each other. The laughter of three souls who proved that healing is possible, even when it seems impossible. That love can grow in the most unexpected places. And that sometimes the family you build is stronger than the one you're born into, because you chose it with your whole heart, knowing exactly what you were getting, and decided it was worth the risk.
I got it on me.
I got it on me.
I know where the apparatus is.
Really? Nice.
Is that a bomb? What is that?
It's a
A loot bug.
They like hoard pieces
You're
of
not
loot
that guy,
and
pal. Trust me. You're not that guy.
take their loot, they get pissed off.
I am that guy, I am. They're all up there. I wonder what they're hoarding up there.
I got an Easter egg for them. I wish killing monsters gave you loot.
Like you get like on Repo? That would be nice. Oh, excuse me, buddy. Where the fuck is the way? This way. Oh god, I'm getting the fuck out. Fuck that, man. Fuck a coil head. I'm not dying there. Good luck, Ben. There's new sound effects for holding the axle and stuff. Blurp. That's his name, don't wear it out, bro. Fih. How are my teammates doing? Oh. Looks like they're being chased by something. Doesn't look too bad. I can't even tell what I'm looking at. They're running from the coil head. They gotta get the fuck out. Oh my god, he's got a fucking snare flea on his head. Oh, wait. I locked it in there. I locked the coil head dream